Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself who taught you to hate being what God gave you.
All glory go to the Creator. It's an honor to be here today. But I love the theme, American healing. Well, first let's think about something. Where did America come from? Have it always been America? Or was it just created to be America? Who are the real Americans? America keep changing and changing and changing. Let's go back in time when the American Indians looked like I look and roamed the southeast part of the United States freely. I love what the mayor said. We have to tell the truth. We cannot heal America till we fix the foundation. Can we start right there?
The African invasion of Spain. The Africans, Berbers, and Arabs gave Spain the greatest material civilization it ever had before or since. Yet, the Africans, Berbers, and Arabs so depressed Iberian or Spanish culture to the point it hasn't recovered to this very day. If you go to Spain right now, when they point to some achievement, it is some achievement the Moors left behind. They still hadn't recovered. I say every invader depresses the culture of a people and takes more away ultimately than they gave.
We've been told that the first people who occupied America, the Native Americans, came here across the Bering Strait. But what if someone told you that when the Native Americans came across the Bering Strait, there were people already living here? These people had an established civilization that not only rivaled that of Egypt in its height, but is also much older. In fact, at the 1996 14th session of the United Nations Summer Conference, these people were recorded as the oldest indigenous people on Earth. In the next few minutes, we'll tell you about a very old and ancient people, the first Americans, the Washita de Dugdamounja. Although it is known by archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists that an old and ancient people occupied this land before the American Indian, up until recently, not much effort has been made to educate the general public of this fact.
People ask, what are the Washita Moors? What's a Washita? What's a Moor? And understand, I am a Washita Moor. The Washita Moors have not gone anywhere. We've not disappeared. We're still here. It's part of American history that most people want to talk about, but beyond just American history, the Washita, we have our own history. The history of the Moors is there. It's been twisted and distorted, and it's just murky legends and the stories that kind of hide the evidence of the Washita and the Moors. The evidence of the Washita is very prevalent. It's just not being promoted and being taught in the education system. No one wants to talk about a race of people who were here, civilized, organized, and giant black people.
The Washita are the dark-skinned original inhabitants of North and South America. They have been referred to as the pre-Columbian civilizations, the prehistoric mound builders, the diggers, and the ancient ones. Certified legal documents of colonial and Spanish and French explorers identified the Washita as the ancient occupants of America. The Washita Nation are akin to the Moors of Northwest Africa and are responsible for building the highly advanced geometric earthworks and sacred burial mounds found all over this continent.
People always ask, who are the mound builders? When did they exist? The mound builders are the indigenous original inhabitants of North and South America. The mound builders did not exist in a vacuum at one time period. We have always been here, and we shall always be here.
Modern science teaches that all of the continents on the earth were once connected in one piece of land. They call it Pangea. Washita history actually says the same thing as do the scriptures. The Washita, the indigenous people of this land that we now call America, were on this land when it was connected in one piece. When this land was connected to what is now called Africa, the Washita were on this land that we call America. So the Washita do not come from anywhere. We did not come to America from someplace else. We were already here. We have always been here. Back to the time when scientists called the land Pangea, when it was one piece. So we have always been on this land. Poverty Point, located in Pioneer, Louisiana, near Monroe, is recognized as the second largest earthen pyramid in North America. This ancient site, called the Great Bird Mound by the natives, was a cultural center for the advanced temple, mound, pyramid civilization. Poverty Point, as it is currently called, is located in northeastern Louisiana, in Washita Parish, in the city of what is now called Monroe, or near Monroe. The Washita referred to it as the Bird Mound because there is a very large earthen mound in the shape of a bird with outstretched wings. In some places it measures 70 feet high. The wingspan of the bird is 640 feet, and it actually measures 710 feet from the head to the tail. At the base of the bird, at the foot, there are 6 concentric ridges composed of earth, and the Washita actually had their homes located on these ridges that at one time measured as high as 5 feet.
In a Western education world, Poverty Point has been identified as the oldest community in North America, in that Poverty Point was a complete city in construction. It's dynamics, it's the civil engineering that went to design the city has been copied for thousands of years, and the community is in the shape of a concentric rings, several concentric rings, and these rings are duplicated over and over again in the U.S. Congress, where the seats are laid out, in the Roman Senate. If you go to most entertainment venues, a theater, you'll find that modern day theaters that are acoustically designed are in the same formation as Poverty Point. And Poverty Point being a place that is known to be as old as, or as young as, 12 centuries before the birth of Christ. When you speak of Poverty Point, you speak of a time that wasn't supposed to exist. Poverty Point, at its height, not its beginning, but at its height, was at least 1,000 years before any agriculture was supposed to have occurred in North America. So Poverty Point has served as an anomaly for years when scientists came in and archaeologists came in and argued that there's no way this could exist. As archaeologists go and do research, they don't even have a name for the time period that they find artifacts at Poverty Point. And what's more, at Poverty Point, not only did they find artifacts there that would date back 1,000 years, but they were enduring years, and that these people showed a legacy of continuous occupation at Poverty Point. In that I mean that they would do research and they would dig down 1 foot, and they may find something that was 4,000 years old. A few more inches, find something 5,000 years old. Further down, 6,000 years old. So here you have evidence of a legacy of continuous occupation.
A commonly known place right here in Baton Rouge, the Indian Mounds on LSU campus, is actually a Washita site that predates Poverty Point.
We know that history has taught us in Western culture that Indians were a group of hunter-gatherers who supposedly came across the Bering Straits about 12,000 years ago and inhabited North America. And I'm here today to tell you that the mounds are not the product of an Indian culture. They're the product of the indigenous people, the original mound building, pyramid building, woolly head, black people. Here today at LSU, we could explore some of the common history and mythology about the origin of the original civilizations in North America. Here the sign reads, hunter-gatherers built these 2 mounds 5,000 years ago. It goes on to read, they are older than the great Egyptian pyramids and predate Poverty Point, long believed to have been the oldest earthen mounds in North America. So here we have evidence once again of slight contradiction, but it's good because it says they are pyramids and predate the Egyptian pyramids in Egypt.
We now are in the time, and people want to now be informed. Once you present people with the truth is undeniable. Once you present people with the truth is undeniable.
Why are we here today? We're here today to set the record straight. All the black people in North America did not come here on slave ships. All the black people in America did not come on slave ships. There are from time immemorial, beginning of time, there were black people on every piece of land on this planet. Okay? So tonight, I'm going to tell you about the original people not only around the world, but the original people here in Louisiana who are the oldest people found on Earth. Did you know that there's some of the oldest people on the planet found right here in Louisiana? Okay, before it's over, bring it right home to Baton Rouge, okay, and show you some of the oldest people on the planet right here. Okay, so right now, who do you know are the oldest people on the planet? Who's that? Who? Adam and Eve? Magnesh? Dangnesh.
So-called Lucy.
Dangnesh, okay. Well, how old is Adam and Eve? Is that Adam and Eve? Dank. Was Eve named Dank?
No.
Okay. Well, let's deal with some old people we found here in North America, right here. This is an Olmec head. Familiar with the Olmec head?
Yes, sir.
The Olmecs are thought to be some of the oldest people in North America. We're going to deal with this concept right here. The hidden history of black civilizations in America, okay? There are several civilizations of black people who were right here long before slaves were brought over here, long before any Indians came across the ocean, long before any European explorers came across the ocean. There were a civilization of ancient black people in North America. History records the Olmecs as being the oldest civilization here. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about some other people here. Of course, we heard about history, about Christopher Columbus. We've given Christopher Columbus our whole life. We know that this is a lie. Okay? There are several books about this. I'm only going to discuss Christopher Columbus. This is not true. Okay? One thing is not true. Let's go on. Also, we've given a history of the African Holocaust, the slave trade. That's part of our history. The slave trade is not our history. We did not do the slave trade. We were victims of the slave trade. The slave trade is the history of Europeans, people from up here, exporting people down here. Okay? These people up here came out of the Ice Age and began to colonize these people and take all of our resources. Okay? We have the continent of Africa. The continent of Africa is the only continent on the planet that is set into the soil, into the ground. All of the continents, South America, North America, Australia, Greenland, all these continents drift. Africa is set in the ground. Okay? Next. This is the way it was at the beginning of time. All these are once connected. Can you see how South America fits perfectly into Africa? You have right here North America and Africa fitting together. Grandmother in California talked about we ain't come from Africa. My grandmother was 6'3" woman, long hair. She came from what they call the territory, Oklahoma. She always talked about we was more than that. We was more than just Africans. We was more than just slaves. Okay, go next. Next, one more time. My grandma talked about a time when the planet was called Mu. Mu. Today you hear European accounts of Lemuria, Atlantis, all these lost civilizations. We don't know who they were. These people disappeared. Next. And of course we have Africa. Next. An ancient word for Africa, a Moorish word, is a Mexum. Next. A Kibulon is the indigenous name for the continent we know as Africa. This is the name long before any European named Africa Cipicanus renamed our continent. Next. Here you have Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word. Egypt is a Greek word. We say Greek word because if you've gone to school, you will learn that the Greeks were the first civilization recognized in Europe, up here. Okay? Go ahead. Next. Ultimately, you will find that the very first people, Degnesh, the oldest woman on the planet, 3.1 million years old. 3.1 million. This might be a problem for some people because I grew up in the church. I always talked about Adam and Eve being the first people on the planet. Adam and Eve, if you listen to any theological scholar, religious scholar, they'll tell you Adam and Eve was roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years old. 6,000 to 7,000 years old. Yeah, we have a black woman, 3.1 million years old. Okay? And I guarantee you she had a mother and a father also. And of course you have Europe. Europe is one of the newest cultures on the planet. Okay? When we talk about Europe, we talk about the Caucasians, and we are taught oftentimes right here, this is where Iraq and Iran is, okay? Whether a little bit of geography for people who are not up on the geography, Iraq and Iran are right here. We're taught that this is the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia, the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, okay? Yet we know that the people here were here for thousands of years. Ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, Tameri. We have our ancient ancestors tell us that the oldest people in the planet came to our zenith in Egypt. But we actually began down here at the beginning of the Nile River, the foot of the mountain of the moon, which is called Mount Kilimanjaro. So understand, the oldest people on the planet come from here, and if you're black or white, you're African American in America, okay? All the people on the planet started here. So understand the time when the world was like this. Next. The Washita people. Who are the Washita people? The Washita people are some of the oldest people on the planet. We were here in North America, next, right here, before the continents drifted apart. Understand, all these people right here, all this land here was once one landmass. People here did not need a boat to go over here. In history, we're taught constantly that somebody had to get a boat and go from over here to over there. The world is flat. Understand that at one point you didn't have to catch a boat and go across over here. Next. The Washita here, when the earth was called Mu. Next. And when the people were called Moors. Okay? Moors. Today they say the word Moor, they spell it with two O's. Moor. It comes from the Latin word Moor. M-A-U-R-O. Maro. Maro is a word that simply means black people. A lot of people want to argue they want to be black, Negro, all these different names. And ultimately, Negro is what? A Spanish word for what? Black. Ultimately, we're all black people. When it comes time, when we're getting jacked up or abused or exploited in some way, we immediately become black. Okay. I am a Moor. Are there any Moors in the house today? We're all a Moor. We're all a Moors. Okay? Next. Here you have the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Toltecs, more Mayans, the Olmecs. Here is where we are taught the first people in North America existed. Up here you have the Washita proper. Do you think it's possible that the people here happen to meet the people up here? Yeah. It's possible, huh? Okay, next. Here you have, what's this right here? Where are we at right here? Washoe. That's the Washoe people, right? What's right there behind there? What's right here? We got Lake Pontchartrain, huh? We got New Orleans. Now who they say was here? The Washoe people? The Chawasha. You got the Wichita up here, okay? You got it's not, see this Kushata? That is called Kushita. The Kushita people, okay? Tunica, Natchez, Biloxi, all these are indigenous people, indigenous black people. All this land here is Washita. If you ever got a map of the United States, you have the Washita River flowing here, up through the Washita Forest, over to the Washita Mountains. You also have the Washita River, the Red River, which runs this way and ends up the Washita River right here, okay? The Washita River. When they had the Great Trail of Tears, and the military came in and made all of the Indians get off their land over, next, get off their land over in Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas. They took them all into Oklahoma, into the Washita.
Olmecs, if we can. Who were the Olmecs, David?
You know, the Olmecs are a very recent civilization to us. Prior to really 1940, the Olmecs were completely unknown. Up to that time, the archaeologists believed that the oldest civilization that was in Central America was the Mayans. And the Mayans went back to, at that time, they were saying, well, the Mayans went back to, say, 500 BC, 800 BC, something like that. Well, what happened was, in the 1930s, art experts in the United States began realizing that there was this style of art coming out of Mexico that was totally unique, and it wasn't Mayan, and it wasn't Aztec or Zapotec or Mixtec. It was this very unusual and distinctive kind of art, statues, jade artifacts, things like that. And this is how they found the Olmecs. And the look of the Olmecs is very curious. The most famous things of the Olmecs are what we call the colossal heads, these gigantic basalt heads. They weigh 20 tons, and they look like Nigerian rugby players or something. They're wearing helmets. They look very, very African. They have the typical Negroid wide nose and thick lips. When you see these guys, they don't look like Mayans. They look extremely African, although some Olmecs also look very Oriental. They look very Chinese. Even other Olmecs have beards and mustaches. They look more like Mediterraneans, Phoenicians, and things like that. So in 1940, what happened was the archaeologists in Mexico had a special conference, and they called archaeologists from all over the world. And at that time, they gave them all this evidence for the Olmecs. They said, yeah, there's this other culture that's older than the Mayans. It's older than every culture that we can find in Central America. And in fact, this ancient culture that now we're going to call it the Olmecs, the rubber people, they're the ones who, in fact, created the calendar. They created the number system. They created the ball game. Many of the early Mayan cities like those, like Oaxacan, deep in the Petén jungles of Guatemala. They're saying now that, yeah, that was originally an Olmec city, but eventually became a Mayan city. The Olmecs themselves go back, they're saying, to about 1,500 BC. The Olmecs are characterized by, again, this really unusual facial features. They often have this frown. They look like they're Africans. And they have the cone head. In my book, Mystery of the Olmecs, there's a lot of pictures of these guys as babies, or else they naturally look like this, but their cranial capacity is like double that of a normal human.
Yeah.
And people look like this all over the world. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, Egyptians did this as well. Tutankhamun himself was also what we'd call a cone head binding. Then the dolicephalus is the technical term for that, where you have an elongated cranium. I have a whole chapter in Mystery of the Olmecs about this, and the more you look into this whole thing of head binding, that's been I think a natural assumption, because when you see some of these skulls and the figurines and things like that come out of Mexico, also South America, particularly in Mexico and in Peru, the Olmecs and the Mayans and people all over the world, in fact, were doing this, including the Kurds in northern Iraq, the Egyptians in Malta, they were doing this.
One of the more controversial positions that you take is that black Africans landed in America 2,000 years before Columbus.
I would not specify the day, but probably exceeding 2,000 years. The fact is that Columbus never came to the United States of America or North and South America. He came as close as San Salvador. There's a rumor that says that Columbus came to America. He did not come to America. He came to an island off America. Vespucci came to America, not Columbus. He came to the Caribbeans. But it is commonly stated, just as much as they state that Columbus discovered America while the Indians sat down watching him doing it. Now, but the knowledge of Africans in the Americas quite knowledgeable to scholars. The fact that it's suppressed doesn't have any validity at all.
Let me bounce a couple of things off of you. One thing, this article that I'm going to be referring to our home audience and to our studio audience, this article came out in the September 1981 issue of Science Digest, and it's entitled Black Kings in Ancient America. You and some other black scholars believe that these people, African people, came to this continent before Columbus.
We don't believe, we know.
How do you know? What evidence?
The evidence is there. For example, when you go to Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula, and at Ecuador and places like that, they have caches of Carthaginian money found 200 feet down in the ground, meaning that there were pluvial disruptions and those money was buried. So it indicates a period of time, at least from that, when you look at the strategy, you could tell the period of time in which they've been here. And when you're talking about Carthage, you're talking about at least 212 BC, when Carthage was finally destroyed by the Romans. Again, the Queen Makeda, which you call the Queen of Sheba, there are maps which Rome, the church in Rome, the so-called Holy Father, has suppressed these maps from the time of Justinian, showing South America and what is today called Central America.
the maps there, and Victoria, Makeda goes back to at least 892 BC.
Before Christ.
Before the
Let me point out another thing, just from the same article. I don't know if we can see this on television, but here is a picture. Tell me what this is, and why do you see this as proof of the presence of Africans in America before?
That is the
Columbus.
head of an Olmec, Olmec. And the Olmecs were said to be the first of the indigenous Americans. And if an Olmec walked in here, then you would believe that he had come from the middle of Africa. And there is no doubt about it that all of the writers prior to racism admitted that the Olmecs were in fact Africans who had come across here. There is no doubt when Pigafetta and others, the point is that Van Sertima is writing and others, but Leo Weiner in 1938 at Harvard University wrote a 2-volume book for which he was fired about the Africans, Olmecs being Africans. And
let me bounce this off of you, okay? You take the same statue. You say, well, you say that they're obviously black features, thick lips, broad nose.
The stereotype.
But, okay, the stereotype. Other anthropologists say, I think Michael Cole was one of them. He says that this is not a black man. He said the people who made these statues, which I understand are 8 feet high, the people who made these statues didn't have sharp enough tools to give them white features, so they're not really black statues. They're white people carved with crude tools. What's your response to that?
It's strange that the tools were not sharp enough to make narrow noses, but it was sharp enough to put eyelids. So it would seem to me that an eyelid is harder to make than a thin nose. But Michael Cole is no less a racist than the head of the Ku Klux Klan.
Dr. Simmons, you also agreed with this position that Africans were in this...
I have no problem, no doubt. Why? As a matter of fact, speaking about, like Dr. Ben mentioned, and you spoke about Michael Nico, I own a book several years ago, and still have it in my possession, by Michael Nico himself, who is considered one of America's leading archaeologists and anthropologists from Yale, one of America's most prestigious schools. In his own work, he referred to them as Negroid. And he went further to state the title of the book is America's First Civilization, what you call civilization. And to turn around and to tell these youngsters and other people in America in particular that the black men was the first to build any type of civilization in the Americas will be disturbing to Americans. And so...
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Even if you're right, let's say you're right, what difference does it make?
It makes a lot of difference.
What kind of difference?
It takes the inferiority complex out of the black man who felt that his only beginning and relationship here in this part of the world is that of slavery. Then it puts him in the driver's seat because, again, they don't tell you that there are man-made hills within the United States. They call them mounds. And they range from in the Midwest all the way down the eastern seacoast of the United States. And they have found artifacts in them that are similar to things found in West Africa and in Egypt, which is Northeast Africa, that predates the arrival of the so-called indigenous Indians to these lands. Another thing is some years ago, one of the major television networks back in New York, I don't remember exactly which one, ABC or which, had did a documentary, and they said that these Olmecs are the ones who brought right into the Americas about 3000 BC. To tell blacks that they ought to be glad to enter into these schools of higher learning today in order to read and write, because their ancestors back in Africa couldn't read and write. You see what it will do to tell them that they brought right into the Americas? Antonio Pigafetta, that Dr. Ben mentioned, who sailed with Magellan when Magellan came to the so-called New World in 1519, when they landed at the land of Verzin, which we now call Brazil, they were met by people in canoes that carried as many as 40 people. And Antonio Pigafetta recorded that these people were jet black. It seemed that they came out of the infernal marshes. That meant that they were burnt. He said, naked and black as they are, in 1519, 27 years after Columbus's arrival to the so-called New World. Another thing they don't tell you, again, you heard my associate...
Well, why haven't we heard these things before? Why don't we read them in the New York Times, the Birmingham News?
If I stole another man's country, and I brought your ancestors here to work for me, could I tell you how great your ancestors were and still expect to keep you in slavery?
Most black people in Birmingham, Alabama, like in Harlem, New York, are Christians, and they go to in a black community, a black minister, a black congregation, but with a white Jesus, because they didn't know that that Jesus, up until Pope Julius II, had the first black Jesus painted. He had Michelangelo to do it, but up until that time, the world worshipped the black Madonna and Child. The present Pope is going back to Poland to worship at the statue of the black Madonna and Child. That's in the New York Times. But what the Times says the next day, don't worry about the black Madonna and the Child. She was originally white, but there was a storm in the 16th century, passed by and turned it black. But the same storm must have gone to Spain, and then it went to Ethiopia, and it went to the Soviet Union and turned all the black Madonnas black. It was a hell of a storm.
You got to
It is. I brought it right here.
What is it?
Before I show you the picture you wanted to see. This is Pope Pius XII in his private chapel, praying to the black Madonna and Child, and all the popes of Rome in their private, just from the church, the Roman Catholic Church itself. I just got rid of the copy of the history of the black Madonna last night. I brought one copy. It's published by the Roman Catholic order of nuns called the Daughters of St. Paul, and they said that the picture of the black Madonna and Child in Poland is reputed to have been painted by St. Luke. Now, St. Luke is said to have been one of Jesus' disciples. He ought to know what Jesus had looked like. So if he painted a black woman and child, who am I to say that he wasn't? Besides that, however, in Anacalypsis...
So now you guys are saying Jesus was black?
We're not saying it. It's what has been written up until the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 325, when Rome, under the order of Constantine, the Roman emperor, ordered the 219 bishops at Nicaea, and they took away Christianity from the Africans. Just remember that before they said Jesus was born in a manger in Bethlehem, they said he was born in a cave in Ethiopia. It was at the Nicene Conference they changed that. Let's go further. Wait a minute, let me be sure I'm following you now. You're saying that the birth of Christ as we know it is not accurate. It's a farce. It was only... You realize what you're saying? A farce, a lie. You know what a lie is? A lie is a lie. The person who wrote that at the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 325 AD, Constantine, the Roman emperor, ordered a conference be held because Rome wanted to take over Christianity from the people who started it. Christianity was started with Pontius and Boetius in a place called Alexandria in Egypt. And Egypt is in Africa. I saw it up to January the 9th, it was there.
I just want you to understand that the Egyptians we now see are conquerors, just like people who came here and took this land from the Indians, so that they're not indigenous to Africa, those who now rule Egypt. And Egypt is just as much a part of Africa as Birmingham or Alabama is part of the so-called United States.
Let me add this. Let me just be clear on this. So what you're saying to me now is that the people that we see, Sadat and all those guys, are not true Egyptians?
No. The fact that Sadat's mother was a Sudanese, Nasser's mother was a Sudanese, but their fathers were Arab conquerors. The one that was the African was Mohammed Naguib, the first president of Egypt, the one that overthrew Farouk. But 1 year after that, since he was looking for a hookup with the other Nile Valley countries as it used to be in antiquity, he was removed by the Arab conquerors. The Arabs didn't come to Egypt until 640. The first non-African people came to Egypt, otherwise called the Hyksos, in 1675 BC. The Africans there were already in the 13th dynasty period. They had built every pyramid you saw there before. They had done the S-turn in the Nile. They built every one of the major temples that had already been built, including the Grand Lodge of Luxor. The first European to come there did not arrive until the Greeks arrived with Alexander II, the son of Philip of Macedonia.
Look, I'm a college graduate. I never heard all this stuff before.
Because they didn't intend to teach you that. They can't tell you that you're inferior and teach you that you taught Europe. The first Europeans to be civilized by the Africans were the Greeks. When you heard of Homer, the first European to have written anything, you couldn't miss that. They said that Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that was not until 833 BC. The Africans had already, in 255,000 at the Tassili Mountain, they had the Sibyllian period, first, second, and third, the pre-dynastic period, all the way up. The Africans had produced men like this, Imhotep, the multi-genius that designed the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first man to be a physician that even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is giving him credit and call him the god of medicine. The Greeks changed his name from Imhotep to Aesculapius. There he is. There he is.
Wait a minute. This gets into what you were saying. So wait a minute. You guys are telling me now that black men taught Homer and...
As a matter of fact,
went to Egypt to school.
As a matter of fact, the Egyptians said Homer was Egyptian, not Greek.
That's right. It's only the Europeans said that. The Westerners now said that he was. But let us go back. Remember that Homer himself said in the Odyssey what? That the gods Zeus and Apollo, Europe's first gods, came from Ethiopia. Go read it, and I didn't write it. He wrote it. Thales, from Thales down to Socrates, and Socrates down to Aristotle, which they call the pre-Socratian philosophers and the post-Socratian philosophers. Each and every one, including Plato, who spent 15 years in Egypt receiving their education.
You're saying Plato was educated in Egypt?
15 years.
See,
before that, you heard nothing of him. Every one of them.
What you'd have me believe then also, for part of what you said last night, is that Plato and these guys went back home, and they were big guys. But they were taught in Egypt? Is that what you said?
They came there for their
education.
And they said it. They didn't hide it. It's the modern writers, the modern instructors and professors who trying to deny it.
Right, you can't have in a racist school in Birmingham non-racist education.
Let me get to something you said last night that's not going to make you very popular in this town and may not allow you to get safely out of town. You told an audience last night that you saw, I think, in a tomb in Egypt.
Yeah.
You saw it with your own two eyes, right?
Yes.
You told me that Moses, there were more than 10 commandments. Moses just took
42. The negative confessions. Moses isn't supposed to have been born until 1349 BC. The Africans were already in the 18th dynastic period. Akhenaten, who died before Moses was born, and Imhotep, who died more than 2,000 years before the birth of Moses, and others at the Grand Lodge of Mem had 42 laws called now the negative confession, one for each nome. They go like this: I have not killed man nor woman. I have not spoken ill of the gods. Moses is supposed to be born in Egypt, they said, at a place called Sukkot. Already, it says that Moses get the 10 commandments of Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is still in Africa, right? The Sinai Peninsula is a part of Egypt. More so, is it possible for Moses to be born in Egypt, educated in Egypt? At age 85, he's still in Egypt, and he did not learn the negative confessions? Is it possible for you to go to school, born in the United States, go to kindergarten, elementary, junior high school, and college, and never heard of the United States Constitution? Then it would have been impossible for Moses, when everybody had to read the negative confession 5 times a day, for Moses not to have seen those 42 laws and extracted 10 of them, leave 32 more. Now, if you could go to the temple of Setaiwan at Abydos, to go to the tomb of Ramesses VI at the Valley of the Kings, go to the temple of Edfu, where you would, by the way, see the story of an immaculate conception and a virgin birth 4,100 years before the Mary and Jesus story.
As a matter of fact,
wait.
No,
let me understand. Let me just put it in form of a question then. I mean, I don't want to stop this, because we're here for information. But what you're trying to get me to believe is that Moses didn't get the 10 commandments from Mount Sinai, but he got them
from his fellow Africans.
Moses was the high priest in Egypt, a high priest of the Egyptians in Egypt. Then what was he teaching? He wasn't a high priest of the Jews.
There were no Jews in those days. They called them. Remember now, there was no Israel yet. Israel is not until 1196. And when we to hear of Abraham, Avram as he was called, coming into Egypt. The Africans are already in Egypt, already in their 14th dynastic period when he shows up. All of the pyramids are built. That's another thing. Every one, the 62 pyramids in Egypt were built before the first Jew was born.
Why was he fleeing from the Pharaoh?
Let me ask
what
you
was the charge?
They said that Jesus said, so how would Jesus, who fought the system, say to the slave, obey your master? It didn't sound rational, would it? So, look, most of the things, we're in a European system. You could come to this university and spend 4 years, go back and spend another 2 for your master's, and another 1 or 2 for your doctorate, and never had any course at all about Africans. But every day you come here, you got courses about Europeans. This is an extension of European culture, European belief, European racism. And it has no intent of teaching about the Africans. The Africans built the Europeans' first university, the University of Salamanca in Spain. These are historical records.
Most of this information are written by whites.
In white books.
It's just that they don't emphasize it in the classroom. As a matter of fact, let me back you up when you open up the discourse. We were speaking about Columbus. None of them in here, none of the listening audience, even in the air, has the faintest idea that in the life of Columbus, when after his death, his family had to go to court because charges was raised, and this is in the record in the Vatican, in the secret archives of the Vatican, that Columbus was shown a map of where the Queen of Sheba that Dr. Ben spoke about, this black woman who had mated with Solomon and produced the son, Menelik I, and they lived more than 900 years before the birth of Jesus, had already sailed through what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, came to lands to the west that was longer than Africa and Europe combined, and that, brother, is North, South, and Central America.
May I add this? Right here at this university they teach, and I've just been here a few days, right, a day. They teach in this institution because it's the same as Cornell anywhere, that Hippocrates was the father of medicine. He's not until 333 BC. Let me read this for you.
Okay, you teach at Cornell, is it?
I teach at Cornell also.
They let you teach this kind of stuff at Cornell?
They teach it now, I'm there.
Okay.
1700, in 1700 BC, that's 1400 years before Hippocrates, you can find the Kahum medical papyrus. Papyrus is paper.
Okay.
A compendium of information about women's diseases and pregnancies. In 1600 BC, that's 1300 years before Hippocrates, the Edwin C. Smith Papyrus, a comparative surgical text and anatomical inquiry. It especially deals with the spinal column. 1550, let me jump to one here. The Ebers Papyrus. A medical, there is the whole book on it. A medical paper by Queen Hatshepsut, the first known queen in history, an Egyptian queen. A papyrus designed to show women how to develop a method to stop pregnancy, to insert into the vagina, made of the shrub of acacia and honey, which break down into lactic acid. Not only that, Monsanto, DuPont.
So we're talking about birth control.
Birth control in 1550 BC by the Africans.
It's a long time before the pill.
A few days before the pill.
But keep in mind, however, keep in mind that Europe is not yet in history.
European history. The Greeks ain't arrived yet.
Just, all I ask, one at a time.
All right.
Okay. Go ahead.
Their civilization haven't begun. Homer have not written his Iliad and Odyssey.
Okay. Anacalypsis is a 2-volume work by Sir Godfrey Higgins, written in 1838 in England and published by Watson Company. The Golden Bow is a 13-volume book by Sir James Fraser, published simultaneously in the United States and England, and it was published in 1938. Bible Myths and the Parallels in Other Religions, written by Thomas W. Downes, and is published in 1887 by Watson Company in London, England. The Ruins of Empire by Concierge Volney is published, there it is. It's published in 1792 by simultaneously in England and France, done by a man who was with Napoleon Bonaparte. But you were taught it as slaves. Nobody.
Slave in 3 pieces?
Yes. We are no longer physical slaves, but we are mental slaves. And this is the worst form of slavery. Some of us believe that the Cadillac and the house on the beach makes us free. But it's the mind that makes us free.
Some of those pictures, because I want to get much into this hour.
Well, this picture that you are looking at right here is the picture of Pope St. Peter, the first Pope of Roman Catholicism, as the church admits.
But this
the
man
church
has a black
said that
face.
Black face, black everything.
If you strip him, he's black all the way down except his fingernails and all those things like that.
Well, how do I know you just didn't get a picture and paint a black face on it?
No, that is the statue in Rome. That you're looking at now.
Right now at the best.
Take a jet.
Can't afford.
Take the fastest means and go to Rome and come back
right
and
there.
then tell us if it's not that same picture. I used to teach at Roman Catholic
wait a minute,
colleges.
this is there now?
Yes, now.
With
And
the black
every pope
Has to kiss his feet.
Every pope kisses his toe. They said his toes are worn by the thousand kisses placed there. If the book that I got it from was not that heavy, I'll bring it, let you see the Pope kissing, Pope John the 23rd
And
kissing.
who is this black guy?
Saint Peter.
The man that they told you, every black minister, every white minister says, Jesus gave Peter the keys to heaven, which means that no white man, nobody else could enter into heaven unless he come by way of me, the black man. But I hold the keys to heaven.
That's right.
I have here is some black saints. St. Augustine, some of you say that St. Augustine, St. John Chrysostom, St. Athanasius, and St. Ambrose. Black saints of the church. You have to remember that Christianity is called in Europe and by Europeans as the new religion.
Right.
It was alien to Europe. Emperor Constantine is the one who decided to take it. He said, I need a religion to unify my empire. With this religion, I could then conquer the world. And he himself was never a Christian until on his dying bed in the year 337 when he became converted to Christianity. But he took it to unify his empire.
But isn't it Augustine, in his unchristian doctrines, he wrote 48 different works. The three most noted in the West is his Confessions, which he specified who he was, and then the Holy City of God, and the last was on Christian doctrines, the fundamental principle for modern Christianity. 3 black women, Felicita, Perpetua, and Nymphana, were the first to die for Jesus Christ. Next, and they were from what is today called...
how do you know this?
It's in the documents of the church. And it's in the writing of the church. And was it not Pope Melchizedek, the 3 African popes of the Roman Catholic Church, Melchizedek, Victor III, and the other one.
Galatius.
Pope
Galatius.
Galatius. We have them there. Now, these are church documents. But remember, when there came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain, the Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, M-A-U-E-R-S, then M-O-O-R-S. From 711 until 1485, 774 years, when we built and brought into Europe the university system, building the University of Salamanca, S-A-L-A-M-A-N-C-A in Spain, a copy of the University of Genève from ancient Ghana, which was equally a copy of the University of Sankore in Tombouctou, which the French later called Timbuktu. Now, look, if you want to read it, read Stanley Lane Poole's The Moors in Spain, written in 1887, or Alejandro Macaziza. Read his book in Spanish, The Moors in Spain, and said that even the bath was introduced by those Africans.
You said the bra was introduced by...
The bath was reintroduced because Rome had a bath before, but they stopped because of not understanding the Christian doctrine that the Europeans had embraced. They stopped for over 1,000 years from taking baths. As a matter of fact, I'd like to make mockery of the fact that the Queen Victoria of England boasting of herself being the cleanest woman in all of Europe, taking 1 bath per month. I have books show you where people were made saints for boasting and never even washed their hands. Saints of the church.
We did not know that Christianity came from Egypt, and that the first monastery was on the island of Philae, which is still there now, and that the Christianity went into Ethiopia and all of North Africa, where they had 7 patriarchs and 27 bishops before the first one in Greece or Rome. We knew nothing about that. We didn't know. Up to now, you got black people sending missionaries to Africa, not knowing that the Coptic church is older than the Roman church. We still send missionaries. We still tell lies about Africans eating the missionaries. I wish we did eat the missionaries, then we would have had no problem. But we still got that. We still got roots. People thinking that roots has something to do with history when the man says a novel. People naming their children Kente Conte and Conte Kente and all kind of thing now. But these people...
You take issue with that? You find something wrong with that?
Yeah, it's garbage. It has nothing to do with history.
Are you calling
It's a novel.
Roots the most popular television show in the history
Amos
of
and
this
Andy
country?
was the most popular radio show. And it had nothing to do with black people. It were two white Jews. You know, as I told you, the worst part of our enslavement is not the shackle on the hand, it's the shackle on the mind. What we have been conditioned, look, remember this, that the slave master doesn't train his slave to be free. We once used to train ourselves when we had such things as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Baptist Church, the African newspaper. Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and all these different people had churches where they taught the people their own history. Look, go into our churches and find out, do they sing the spirituals anymore? No, they got anthems from Scotland, from Germany. They don't sing the songs of the African people anymore in the churches.
What's wrong with that?
What's wrong? How does a song from Europe, from Scotland relate to you? You Scottish? You could have fooled me. Okay. The angel of the Lord come to Mary and said to Mary, carry the little boy and hide him among his cousin in Egypt, because Herod wants to kill him, right? She comes and take this child to Africa. Egypt is in Africa. Hid him among his cousin. He's blonde, he's blue-eyed, and he got golden hair. And he's hidden among a bunch of black kids. The army came, the Navy came, everybody searched every house and can't find that boy. There is no major university, major library in Europe I have never been to. There's no major library in Asia or Africa I have never been to. I have been to every one of the major tombs and temples of Egypt and got the pictures and read the hieroglyphs and everything like that.
Up to today, he still operates that way. Wherever he goes, the first thing he does is plant a flag. When the United States sent men to the moon, they didn't care if there were moon people up there. The first thing they did is put that flag. This belongs to us and the Bible.
I'm ready to kill for it.
Okay, putting aside...
The first known religion was the worship of Ptah. P-T-A-H, along the Nile. There was no Adam and Eve mentioned any place yet because there was no Judaism, and if there's no Judaism, there's no book of Genesis.
But you went so far as to say that the virgin birth, Adam and Eve, Noah,
were all repetition, and they could read the works of...
You said they're myths.
They're myths. All religion is myths. Religion is based upon belief.
There are people who would bet their lives that Jesus was born.
There are people who are dying to go into cemeteries. But that doesn't make things stop. The way we were taught as if there was no other religion but Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. There were religions, and our religion way older than Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
Let me jump
that the Africans did. The religion of the worship of Olodumare, for example, among the Yoruba, is more than 2,000 years older than Christianity.
The pictures you were about to see should prove without a doubt that the people commonly referred to as African Americans are none other than the Anasazi races of North America. More information can be obtained at AfricanAmericans.org. Enjoy the presentation. Just 70 miles south of Birmingham, Alabama lies Moundville Archaeological Park. Moundville was a major center before European contact. The lifestyle mannequins pictured here are the forebears of the indigenous people who live there to this very day. I contacted the museum and asked how long had these mannequins been part of the exhibit. I was informed that they had been there since the early 70s. In 2010, the museum received a facelift, and now these are the new residents of Moundville. These people are replacing the indigenous people. This is further proof, as many have speculated in the past, that the black Negro American is being Africanized off of his ancestral homeland. So now when you visit the museum, you get this instead of this. In his book, Confederate Currency, The Color of Money, the author John Jones showed how the black Negro Americans were used on the money in the southern states. Question: Would Europeans drag people from halfway around the world, then put them on their currency? Of course not. They were trying to get the indigenous people to use money because they have never used it before. So adding them on the money made the Amerindians think that they were becoming part of a European economic system, when in reality it was used to steal their earth. It is important to keep in mind that at this time, the Europeans thought that the world was flat. But when they got to the Americas, that notion was immediately discarded. We all know that very bright talents may be lodged under a very dark skin. William Byrd, 1728. William Byrd was a tobacco planter in Virginia. When he talks about dark skin, who is he alluding to? Well, let's take a look. This photo shows how an original work can be transformed throughout the years. The first female is the prototype of the so-called African American female. The second image shows you the same drawing, but major changes have occurred. Her hair is different, her skin is a little lighter, her features different, her clothes are different. The third drawing is a 180-degree shift from the first two. It is here where the African American history begins. First, the image is looking away from what the first two images are looking at. Second, the third female looks like she's not even from America. She looks like she can be from almost anywhere, India, Asia, Middle East, etc. Though she is a copy of the first two females, the third image has pearls on her neck. Pearls are not the preeminent jewelry among North American Amerindian females. This late 1700s drawing of the reconciliation between Britannia and her daughter America should pose some serious questions. How did America get to become Britain's daughter if America was here before Britain even knew she existed? Why is America surrounded by English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese men? Where are the American males? Why is the female depicted as America running into the arms of Britannia? And is the woman depicted as America, is she from Africa? These images are entitled Emblem of America and were published in the late 1700s. Who are the children in these images? Who are the people going into the waterfall behind them? Are we to believe that these children came to America on so-called slave ships? Do they look like slaves? This photo is entitled An Indian Warrior Entering a Wigwam with a Scalp, taken from a series of letters by an officer traveling through the interior part of America. Doesn't he look like someone we all know? This drawing is signed by the author in 1695 and is called Ancestral Tablets. This drawing is from the New England part of America, around Boston. Question: are these people slaves? This drawing is from the book Biography and History of the Indians of North America by Samuel Drake. This book was published in 1834. Again, does this man look like he just got off of a slave ship? And if he did, where is he from? Is he black? Is he a Christian? Is he a Democrat? No, these are the identities that the Amerindians accepted when they became U.S. property. This is the drawing I found online. The book that it came from was written in a language I didn't understand. But notice the word above the drawing says Florida. All of the other males in the photo are dressed just like the male on the stage. Are these the indigenous people of Florida? Another Florida drawing. I would like to point out that when you search these images online, you'll find other images that are complete replicas of these. The ethnic identity of the people are always changing, just like at the Moundville Museum. This drawing is of the Caribbean. When we talk about the Arawak or Carib Indians, this is who they are. They didn't die out, they just had their identities altered. This is an early map of Paraguay in South America. Notice the indigenous people being depicted here. Notice the animals that they are with. Are those the same animals that one would find on the continent of Africa? The reason I'm showing you North America, South America, the Caribbean, and now Mexico is to show you how the empire was wiped out. The Anasazi race are the indigenous people of America. America is the landmass and the people were the Anasazi. It didn't become divided until the colonizers came and started giving out their names and we accepted them. So now instead of being Anastasi, we are black, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Jamaican, Moor, Christian, Guatemalan, and whatever else name they decide to give us. That's why the borders were put up. America has been carved into almost 100 different nations and states. This is a main obstacle to unity. These pictures are from Mexico. But what was it before it was called Mexico? The Spanish came in and claimed it theirs and named it Mexico. But who were the indigenous Mexican? And what was their relationship to the indigenous people of North America? Or were they the same people? This is an indigenous female from Arizona. Notice the facial similarities she shares with the Aztec female from Mexico. Could these females be of the same bloodline? Indigenous males in Arizona. Notice the shelter in the background. Could the males living in the cities today go out in nature and build them a shelter to protect them from the elements? These last drawings are off the coast of California. Do these people look like they've ever been in captivity? Are we to believe that these people were kidnapped from somewhere in Africa and brought all the way to California? I hope this presentation has given you enough information to spark you to do your own research.
At the same time, I have Christopher Columbus, Category 5, still sitting on shore, beating up on us. Okay? So then I have Andrew Jackson. Can that be a Category 10?
Yeah.
Okay, because if I could rank him, he's a 10. He's still beating on us.
Yes.
None of these European storms have moved. At least Katrina hit ashore, did the damage, and moved on. Yeah. These categories continue to beat today. I wish it was drum beats, but it's not. It's not something you can dance to. It's something that you have to duck and dodge and constantly try to stay out of the way of the debris that it blew. Is that a good way to describe it?
Excellent.
Some of the debris that these categories have blew upon us, yes, you can help. But the first thing you have to go through being classified as crazy, because the United States have fixed it in the United States where whatever is not by their rule is crazy. So we have to take those abuse. That's part of some of the debris that's blown ashore and still hitting around. A lot of the universities don't know about us because when they did write the truth about us, it was covered in the basement. So it's still down in the basement, okay? A lot of the truth was in the St. Louis Cathedral. Where did they put the records? A lot of the truth was in the Cabildo. Where is it? A lot of the truth is inside the tombs of the graves that's at St. Louis Cathedral, because they have a lot of Indians buried in there too. The bricks that built St. Louis Cathedral, my people made those bricks. The bricks that built the tomb in the older graves came from my people. Those categories was not only able to blow debris, but it was also able to cover things up. Like Katrina blew a lot of rubbish that covered up things. You know, that sludge that was left in your house and on your ground. Some of the sludge of this storm that I have to deal with is, am I this color as an Indian because of African descent? Or am I this color because this is the color of my ancestors? Well, the truth to that lies with the anthropologists, if they tell the truth. Because as they dig into the grounds, they have found people and they know they look like I look. But do they want to be politically correct as a white man to stay in standing with his white man? Or do he want to just let the truth lie in the basement? If you would look into the older court records of Louisiana, you'll find my people there. But it be looked upon by some people as Europeans, because the white man duplicated every last name he gave to us after being forced to take a family name. He duplicated those same names. So now, then you could easily say, well, it's not the black Greens, it's the white Greens. It's not the black Dupree, it's the white do creed. But I was always told the proof is in the pudding. So in my family, we didn't tell the white folks all our business. So when they stole our identity, mispronounced it as Choctaw, they would come back into Lacombe, see our ways of living, and then they would mimic this back in Oklahoma. We have to ask, as historians, who signed the Dancing Rabbit Treaty and some of the other treaties? Research their name and see if the people that's in Oklahoma, I'm finna get real controversy. Let's see if there's really Native Americans that your tax money is paying for today, no matter what color you are. I said, if the government want to really know who been ripping them off, check out and see who's inside that pudding. Because what's in the pudding sure ain't chocolate. It's all vanilla. Okay? Yeah. What you were doing, Wes, what you were doing, Ms. Hill, is cutting into that pie or that pudding. You're showing the truth. Like you said, you was in an engagement the other day and you exposed some things that was accepted, and some may have been rejected by us, but it was the truth. And this is what you have been doing. People are looking at it now in a different way, and I'm glad you said about the time and era. Some people were ashamed to even say they was Native American again, especially living in an African American community, because then they told me they was looked upon as being a traitor or trying to be something that they were not. But then they knew their grandmother was an Indian. And some of these callers, when they called me, I explained to them that what we're looking at here is a denial that is coming from the inside now, not from the outside. And we need to challenge United States on that. And United States need to answer us on that. How can I be one drop Indian, okay, and be 99 drops European, and I can be classified as an Indian, versus I can be 99 drop Indian, 1 drop black, now I cannot be an Indian. Are y'all with me? And this is what this blood quorum thing they have used against us. That to me should be illegal at this day and time in the United States. And the reason it's not illegal because it haven't been exposed enough. And a lot of people do not know through the media and universities the discrimination and racism and prejudice that Indians face today. When I say Indians, I'm not talking about Oklahoma. I'm not talking about a lot of these tribes, and I'm gonna be honest with you, here in Louisiana. Those are tribes put together underneath Andrew Jackson and underneath the Indian rights law. I'm talking about indigenous Indians who picked up the name Indian as a tag by Europeans.
Just like nigger.
Thank you.
That's right.
And by giving us that tag, you stole our real identity. There's a swap took place. They don't understand is United States not fixing to give us United States back. Okay?
We're conquered.
What I want to know is where do we get the government-to-government relationship we was promised under these lying treaties? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And where do we get as a nation to be able to teach our people within their own culture? Where do we get to enrich ourselves, not only financially, but spiritually and physically, without the United States hindering that? Roderick had someone to call me a couple of days ago, and he said, what are your greatest interests? I said, well, one, I would like maybe to farm the land again. I would like to drink clean, clear water again that's healthy. He said, I would like to be able to ride through my town, or my people ride through their town, and not tell me that they got to look over their shoulder because they saw a white police car. And I ain't talking about the car being white, and the white police in it.
Yeah.
I said, and another thing I'm fighting for is that we as a nation have a place of governing that is represented and recognized by the United States government. They say, well, that's federal recognition. I say, no, that's not. That is a God-given right. Okay, a God-given right. Because even the people that's in churches of whatever race, they keep singing about them 12 tribes of Israel. Or they keep singing about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, everybody didn't come from Jacob.
That's right.
And if they did, that means everybody ought to be black. Because Jacob was married within his tribe. People that looked like him. He married his uncle's children. Okay? So, when we sit here, we won't even tell the truth about what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob looked like. So, then I have to go to mine, like I told this caller that come from you. How far back you think they've been stealing our color and race?
Thank you.
And do you think they're going to give real people back their race? No. That's something we have to stand up. We have been allowing, like I was telling you before the show started, we have allowed people to make us accept things. When the Europeans have come here, whatever they don't like, they write a law. And they stick together and they push it through.
That's right.
It's time we, you know, don't get mad at me because I had a gentleman call me one time. He says, well, how can you be a chief? One of Roger callers. How can you be a chief and be a woman? I said, how did you get here without a woman? Took a woman to bring you in this world. And you show me another way a woman didn't lead a man in here when she led you into life.
That's right.
Okay? So next thing, I challenge my men of color to give us the respect that God gave us right to. He made us the one to bring about you. That doesn't make us disrespect you. That doesn't make us behind you. God put us in front. He put us here to bring you forth. Now, as a woman, do I respect my men? Yes, they're the strength of our country. But the United States found a way to break them down too.
That's right.
I hear people say my deadbeat dad. Well, let me name y'all some deadbeat dads. As historians, we need to talk about. Who's paying for Andrew Jackson deadbeat grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren?
An entire family.
Who are paying for these illegitimate children that white men's made here?
That's right.
When an Indian had more than one wife, and even the Bible, Jacob had more than one wife and he took care of them all. He took care of his children. He was not looking for somebody else to come feed his children.
That's right.
I would like to say this to you. I'm not trying to change anyone's belief. A lot of the calls I get from around the country, I address some of the calls like you were just saying. I'm not trying to change your belief or your race, but I am saying for the last several hundred years, you've been on my land here. And what I am saying, be at least a little appreciative that when the slaves were running from their slave masters, we opened our doors and villages for you to be here today to tell me you from Africa. So, you know, thank somebody from giving up everything they had because we believed in God, and we feared God, and we opened up our doors and villages. We fed your people. We took care of your people. Same thing I would tell the Europeans when they ask me, what are you worried about? We're the people you based your Thanksgiving off of. We gave you everything and you gave us death. You gave us bloody trails of tears. Well, okay, African Americans have even given us a bloody trail of tears. You know what I get from my African brothers and sisters? That we opened our doors and gave to them life. You know, they say, why are you worried about that now? You ought to embrace being of Africa. Well, I've been here for thousands of years. Now, brother, for me to go to Africa and tell Africa I'm a Native American, I have met with a lot of friends in Africa. They accept me as chief of this nation. India accept me as chief of my nation. Other countries do. Why can't my brothers and sisters of Africa here be more graceful and help us the way we help you all?
Warren?
Well, I disagree with her historic interpretation of Native Americans being saviors of those 12 million souls from Africa who were brought here, who saved this land. This Louisiana colony was saved by the Africans from growing rice, and the Native Americans participated with the Europeans in capturing Africa who were brought here, who saved this land. This Louisiana colony was saved by the Africans from growing rice, and the Native Americans participated with the Europeans in capturing Africans as slaves and also using them in the slave trade. I just disagree with her historical interpretation on the record. I identify with those 12 million Africans who were brought here and have the strongest soul.
Well, the first thing I want to say that we all are one people. Now, we might be subdivided into different names under Australians, Libyans, Puerto Ricans, Haitians, whatever, we all still one people. If we say that we are Shatta and we are Native Americans and we've been here on this land, that's who we are. Now, I can give you a brief history on how the West Africans came over on the boat to South America and set up civilization. And it's been documented that the stone heads are still down in La Venta, down in South America. Those, they call them Olmecs. The Olmecs mixed with some of the Chinese invaders that were coming in through the Bering Strait. And we mixed together and we made what is called the so-called Native American now, which is the red man.
That's right.
That's going around perpetrating on our property. Now, what you had done is we gave them parts of the land to civilize. I mean, not civilized, but
inhabit.
And we mixed in with those people. But you had the Europeans that came in and took it away from all of us through trickery, through
disease,
different laws that that we could not live up to on their monetary system, through the forms of unjust taxes.
So what you're doing is you're actually giving us the history of integration, and how integration has always been detrimental to the black man, be he called indigenous to this continent or any continent. But before we go, we want to hit
one thing quick before he leaves.
Go ahead.
Let's look at the census that's coming out. First, my people were under Indian. Then someone come along and say, well, we're going to take them, we're going to move them again. We're going to make them mulatto. So some of my people got trapped back there under Indian while some moved into the mulatto era. Then when the white man seen that that wasn't going to eliminate enough of us, then he moved us from mulatto. Then he moved us to colored. I can show you how I got where I'm at. So then my people, some of them got left into the colored zone. Then they moved my people again into Negro, black, and African American. All I'm asking, my blood kin, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm looking for a Pacific people that's lost here in New Orleans that have the same blood lineage that the two of us have, that got lost through the census. Like this time, the census, last census, we were Native American. This census, we are going to be American Indian. You with what I'm saying? In each era, we lose people.
Why don't you just say Indian? Why you want to be American Indian?
They done changed us again. Yeah, now they have us American.
You want to be indigenous, period.
Allow the white man to come in and just assume our identities. They came into Egypt and they assumed the identities of the Egyptians. They came down into Puerto Rico and assumed the Puerto Ricans' identity. Now they come in and they're assuming the Native Americans' identity. They're setting up tribes. They're getting government money. They're the thieves.
Oh yeah, no.
They're the biggest thieves that's going around.
Can I say something?
Yes, I'm right here.
Right now, to the brother that called in earlier, there are land papers before slavery in my people's name here. How was it? Because when the Europeans came here, what Roger is talking about, we gave a lot of people some spots to settle. But they took those spots and wanted bigger spots. My people right now, the Shatta, they took on the end from our people, I'm talking about the end of the big take, 25 million acres of land by removing my people from here to Oklahoma. That was the last of their land, 25 million acres of land. And it was people that looked like me. What Andrew Jackson did was he appointed some Europeans. I want you to know how I'm here, brother. My grandfathers were generational of chiefs. I come from a line of chiefs. I'm from a royal family of chiefs. What the Europeans did was took my people, took the women and the children, and some European that Andrew Jackson was friends with, appointed them as chiefs, left the original chiefs back here, took the white chief that he appointed, which into Oklahoma is, as you know today, as Indian Territory. Indian Territory was set up by mixed breeds, okay?
Yeah.
The people that signed the treaty was either non-native or mixed breeds. The full breeds was left back here. And after a while, they filtrated us into what we know as African American today. I'm not saying we're not family from back in time. I'm saying I was just here. Some come by slave ship. I came here years before by entrepreneurship. Either way it go, brother, we in here on the same ship.
Yeah.
When Katrina hit, it didn't stop to see which ship brought you in, the first one or the second one. And this is what I'm challenging my brothers and sisters to do. Let's see what ship we in now, and what can we do to stop up and plug up some of these holes before we sink even deeper. Brother that said he's from Africa, he better be just moved in here from Africa, because he hung around Louisiana at any given time. He don't know what he is.
They look at us as a diluted race.
I tell my people a lot of time back in the village, most people are more closer to being a mutt without a pedigree than ones with a pedigree.
That's right.
If you don't know where you come from in your genealogy, you're just a mutt.
That's right.
Now you can get mad with me, brother, but I want you to move from being a mutt to having a pedigree. I'm saying you come from somewhere, from somebody. Let's lay that out. So that they can stop making us feel like we just a gumbo.
That's right.
Who are your ancestors and which way did they come here?
That's right.
Because otherwise, you just saying you're from Africa, nobody's paying you any attention either. You just as bad off or worse. Because at least I have some land papers saying I was here. Now I want you to show me your land papers that you were in Africa. By God's will. Fort Pike belonged to us before the Europeans ever came here. That was one of our forts, and it wasn't for a fort for battle against European. That was built as a safety zone against with the water. So our people built mounds. Fort Pike was originally a mound and a storage place, okay? There were salt mines down there. And my people built that as what you would call a modern day refrigerator or deep freezer. Fort Pike, from my ancestors, was told to me, this was built where they went down and put meat, buffalo meat, and salted the meat, and that's where they stored it at. A lot of historians don't know that, so I'm giving them a clue to what Fort Pike was. That was a freezer, in other words, where they had their meat. In being in battle and dealing with Spain and France and them taking over the fort, it became a battle fort instead of what it was originally built for. And through that era, also that fort was used to keep other tribes from stealing your food supply, okay? So at Fort Pike, through Spain taking it, France taking it, different ones have ruled there, the fort was used against many Indians in the Florida area. You're talking about the Florida parishes, and that's what I once was, a Florida Indian, not a Louisiana Indian. Louisiana, where I live at, was not a part of the Louisiana Purchase. It was taken in 1810 by decree. Still underneath Spain, we were still under. What you're looking at Fort Pike, the Seminoles was there just, what, Roger, 2 months ago? Yeah. I met with the chief from Oklahoma of the Seminoles there. I was a guest there so that the two of us could meet because of the plight that they suffered at Fort Pike, where thousands and thousands of their people died stacked like sardines, same as the slaves would say they came on slave ship. Well, these people were stacked like sardines in the bottom of, on the basement there, and they died. Yes, I had uncles who died at the Fort Pike. They took what was ours and used it against us and destroyed us. Not only did Indians die there, also African slaves have died there. Documented here, even in New Orleans, that they had more Indians in New Orleans than they had Europeans or slaves.
Yes. And answer your question?
Yes. Isn't it true that every major site, military base or government building, was built on a site that was first occupied by the indigenous?
That's correct. Yeah. And while you're on that, I'm going to say this real fast. Right now, Fort Pike is the first and only one have stepped back for our nation and say, look, we're trying to fix back some of the stuff the older ancestors messed up. There are a lot of places, even if you go up into Fort Smith in Arkansas, that was used against us. That's another story that can get very deep. We're going to save that one, but I'm glad you're touching on the military part in it.
I just had a quick little thing about the brother who came first, the African or the Indian. I mean, it was, we all one family. It doesn't matter who got here because they enslaved the Indians as well as the Africans. At one time, the governor of Louisiana passed a law that no Africans could dress as Indians because they didn't know who was who. Mm-hmm. And that's the tradition of the Mardi Gras Indian, which I'm also a part of. And we try to preserve that history and keep it going.
Look at the knowledge coming out here tonight. Chief.
Well, it's not important. Is the chicken come first or the egg? See, that's what we're at. Is it the chicken or the egg? That's not important. Can we use both things as a resource to help us? And the egg is good and the chicken is good. That's what I'm going to close on.
There's an interesting story of a guy who, his name was Seth Tanner. And Seth Tanner was a Mormon guy who came down from Utah in the late 1800s. He had to flee Utah, essentially. He was a wanted man. He had been part of this famous Mormon massacre. You see all this great dynastic architecture. They build these huge temples, pyramids, other buildings out of giant blocks of granite and basalt and limestone. But supposedly, though great architects and having, quite an advanced science, the Egyptians didn't go anywhere. They did have large boats, but they didn't use them, supposedly. They were a very sort of insulated civilization, allegedly, who just stayed in their own country and, maybe made a few little exploratory adventures and things like that. That is basically your isolationist point of view. Most universities are teaching that, especially in the United States. That's the idea that civilizations are isolated from each other. They don't have much contact. Crossing oceans is very difficult. You can't just get in a boat, cross an ocean, and go somewhere. You suppose you have to walk places, allegedly. The flip side of that is diffusionism. It is, I'm more of a champion of that, for sure. Thor Heyerdahl, the famous Norwegian archaeologist, who I met several times and was something of a hero of mine, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Kon-Tiki fame?
Exactly, and he would build these balsa rafts, and he would build reed boats and things like that, and then he would sail them across the Atlantic or Pacific as far as he could, trying to prove that ancient people also got into boats. I mean, it's the whole idea that oceans are barriers. For Native Americans to get down to Central America or South America, they can't get in a boat and go there. They have to, walk for thousands of miles through hostile tribes. It would take them generations, where, in fact, being in a boat would be much faster, safer, easier to go places. And, and in fact, oceans are highways, not barriers. Getting into a boat and going someplace, that's an easy way to go places. Ancient Egypt was an unusual country, like ancient Israel. You had countries that had the ability to have a port on the Mediterranean, which the Egyptians did, and the ancient Hebrews, and you could have a port city on the Red Sea. And that would allow you to go out into the Indian Ocean, you could go down through East Africa, you could cross the Arabian Sea, you could go to Muscat, you could go to Persia, to India, to Sri Lanka, on to Australia, and of course to Pacific Islands and to South America. Now, it's kind of interesting how archaeologists think, particularly the isolationists. One of the stories in the Bible is of King Solomon's mines and a trip to Ophir. And Ophir was a 3-year journey. And it's talked about in the Old Testament in Kings. They would leave from Elat on the Red Sea, and they would go for one entire year out somewhere past India and Indonesia. There they would get exotic feathers, they would bring apes back, and they would bring back all this gold. And it was this gold that they brought back that built the first temple in Jerusalem. Now here's the thing. You have the Bible saying, it's a 3-year trip. Right. 1 year to go there. 1 year. They would stay there 1 year. And then it would be 1 year back. Well, archaeologists were looking for Ophir and King Solomon's mines. And where they think they are, they found a gold mine in Saudi Arabia. So they thought, this has to be King Solomon's mines. This is Ophir. And others would say, they went to Somalia or some area like that in East Africa. Well, there's a problem with that, and that is that, those places are only a few days sail from Elat in the Red Sea. They're not even several weeks of voyaging in actuality. In a year, the ancient Phoenicians and Hebrews who were going on these journeys to Ophir, they could easily have gone as far as Australia, for instance. Sure. And even, as I say in my book on Mystery of the Olmecs, and also in my other books on lost cities of ancient Lemuria in the Pacific, that they were the ancient Egyptians, the Chinese, many other ancient civilizations. They were going out into the ocean. They would they were going out into the Pacific. This is one of the solutions, too, to many of the pyramids and megaliths on remote Pacific islands. Tonga, there's this giant city built out of basalt crystals in Micronesia, a city called Nan Madol. That is like the eighth wonder of the world. The majority of it is actually built into the ocean. Archaeologists estimate there's 150 million tons of basalt that's stacked up into artificial islands and walls and buildings on Ponape in Micronesia. And this incredible city, I mean, it's actually built into the ocean. It's not even on the island. They don't know who built this. I mean, archaeologists are saying, okay, these kind of like Easter Island, where you have a remote island, it has giant megalithic remains on it. But mainstream archaeologists their explanation is, well, you know, these islanders just kind of got to this Polynesians to some remote island, and they were bored, and they had nothing else to do, so they built these giant statues. They built this huge city.
Well, all right, in this particular case with the Egyptians ending up in the Grand Canyon, where would they have set sail from Egypt? Where do they land, and why walk or travel all the way to the Grand Canyon from there?
Well, you know, I mean, and that's interesting, too. They may not have had to have walked all that way. I mean, today, all this area around here, Yuma, Palm Springs, very much the inland areas of Southern California and western Arizona, I mean, it is trackless desert. There's no rivers around there at all, except for the Colorado River coming out of the Grand Canyon. In ancient times, and in my book on Lost Cities of North and Central America, I actually have maps and stuff in there of this. The whole West was much different in ancient times, and California especially. If you look at a good relief map of California, you can see instantly what it was like even just a few thousand years ago, and that is that Central California was a huge inland sea. And all around Fresno and that area, I mean, that's what they call the Central Valley. I mean, if ocean levels or California had just, had been shifted a little bit, that whole area would be flooded, not only from the Golden Gate area, but also up from the south, the Salton Sea, areas like that. And in fact, there were Finger Lakes already going up into Nevada. Some years ago, I did a show for the Discovery Channel and the Learning Channel, and it was all about giants and the legends and lore of giants. They flew me to Reno, where we went to Lovelock, Nevada, which is right near where they do the Burning Man festival now every summer.
Right.
And but what is in Lovelock is fascinating, because in Lovelock is a state park known as the Lovelock Caves. And in those caves, what happened was these ranchers began excavating this cave at the turn of the century, and they were looking for bat guano. And there was just tons of bat guano inside these caves. And as they started digging out the caves, they started finding artifacts. Now, the Paiute legends of that area had talked about these red-haired giants coming by boat up around Lovelock. You couldn't do that today. Try and go by boat from the ocean to Lovelock. I mean, it's 1,000 miles of desert.
Can't do it, yeah.
That's right. So their legend was that these giants, red-haired giants, came in boats. Even that area around Lovelock is still some lakes that are drying up today. And, there's just some marshes there that are the remains of these ancient lakes. And archaeologists and geologists say, yeah, there were lakes there, although, it's a problem with geology. Geologists think everything's millions of years ago, when in fact these lakes couldn't have been that long ago, because the Paiute Indians still had legends and stuff of it. I mean, it was only some hundreds of years ago, maybe 1,000 or something like that. Well, so the Indians have these legends of the red-haired giants. When these ranchers began digging out the bat guano in the Lovelock Cave, they started finding duck decoys, baskets, all kinds of hunting and fishing tools for a large lake, and And then, incredibly, they found a number of skeletons. And these skeletons were like 7-foot-tall people. They had long red hair. They dragged like a dozen of these skeletons out of the cave. This all was around the turn of the century. Get this, George. There are 2 museums in Nevada today, one in Lovelock, one in Winnemucca. Those museums are wholly dedicated to the finds that were found in the Lovelock Cave. The excavations were done by the University of California at Berkeley. Actually did the excavations. They know that these things came out of these caves. People at the museum talked about a photo of a rancher standing on a crate holding one of these giants by the hair. And, I mean, this thing is huge. And, 7 feet tall, that is a large person with red hair.
Right, and at that time, that was really a giant.
And here's the thing. That photo of that giant, every single one of these giant skeletons is utterly missing. No one knows not only where the skeletons are, they don't even know where photos of them are.
If the Smithsonian confiscated all these artifacts, mummies and tablets and things like that, why keep it a secret?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that. But part of it is, and it's the same reason why a lot of things today would be kept a secret. They're engineering history, and today history is politically correct. It's not necessarily what really happened in the past. It's more like what they want to have happened, or how politically correct they want, say, certain natives to be, or something like that. Another problem, particularly out west, was the Mormons. And of all the states in the United States, you've got the universities basically teaching isolationism. That is, certainly Egyptians didn't come to North America or South America. They didn't travel. Chinese people didn't get in boats and go places. All the Native Americans walked from Siberia down through Canada, down to South America. But in Utah, they don't teach that. And the Mormon religion, which is, pretty interesting in itself. I'm not a Mormon, but I grew up in Colorado, so I've spent a lot of time around Utah and Mormons, and I'm quite familiar with their history. They claim that, the Egyptians and lost tribes of Israel, that they escaped from the Middle East. They got into boats, they crossed the Mediterranean, then crossed the Atlantic, they landed in Mexico. These were the Nephites and the Jaredites. They then fought all these battles. You can add to that, as far as I'm concerned, Chinese coming here, Egyptians, Polynesians. You've got Basque sailors and even African kingdoms and stuff like that. But so here is a problem with, say, the Smithsonian and mainstream history, is that suddenly a find like this, that the Egyptians would say were in the Grand Canyon, say that Romans came to Arizona. I go into this in my book as well. That is basically major ammunition for the Mormons. I mean, this is what they've been saying. They're saying, this is what the Book of Mormon says. Mm-hmm. It says people crossed the ocean. It says Romans came here and Jews came here and stuff. And, see, Book of Mormon must be right. And so the Smithsonian and other powers that be, they're not wanting to give credence to the Book of Mormon, which these finds, would kind of do. And, as an archaeologist, I read all kinds of archaeology books and history books, total fringe, far out books, similar to the ones I write, and mainstream of all kinds, and the skeptical books. I read them all. And the Mormon archaeology books are quite interesting. And so these are sort of reasons why they want to have cover-ups. A similar thing happened in Brazil, let me tell you, just to show you how these things become politically correct or incorrect. Back in the 70s, the Brazilian Navy went out and they discovered there was a Roman shipwreck off of Rio de Janeiro. And it was underwater. The Navy went down diving on it. They found actually several boats. They started bringing up Roman amphora and Roman coins and stuff like that. America's most famous underwater archaeologist, a guy named Robert Martin. We were talking about how the Brazilian Navy had discovered these Roman shipwrecks off of Rio de Janeiro. But what happened in the end there, with this exciting archaeological discovery, was became politicized, and that suddenly the Italian community in Brazil were saying, oh, well, hey, Romans discovered Brazil, in fact, and in fact they should all get, citizenship or whatever. And so what happened was the Brazilian government ordered the Navy to go out there, and they buried these Roman shipwrecks rather than excavate them. So that's how kind of things become politicized. I thought it was interesting, also your commercial about gold, and we were talking about how the Egyptians and King Solomon and these guys, they went around the world looking for gold. Gold is indestructible. All the gold of ancient times still exists today. To the ancient peoples, including the Egyptians and the Olmecs, the ancient Israelis, it was gold. It was what really mattered to them. They were also searching for jade was very valuable to them, exotic feathers. Peoples have always gone after gold. And in fact, in Peru, and this is one of the ideas, too, that the ancient land of Ophir that the Egyptians and King Solomon and the Phoenicians were going to was Peru. And in Peru, gold was so plentiful there in ancient times and right up to the times of the Spanish conquest that the Peruvians actually used gold as like wallpaper. And the big temples and things like that in Cusco were lined with beaten gold. They had gold goblets and plates and everything like that. It was for the Spanish, they went there and said, hey, just give us all of your, dish pans and stuff like that. Well, and they just took them. And the Incas said, yeah, sure, have them, and it was gold. But you see, it's kind of interesting. If in ancient times the King Solomon's navy and whatnot had traveled through the Red Sea, out through the Indian Ocean, and this is what the Bible says they did. Just how far they went is the question. But they could have easily have gone out then right between New Guinea and Australia, out into the Pacific. Next stops would have been Fiji and Tonga. From there, you would hit to Tahiti and the Marquesas, and then you would land in Peru. And if you got to Peru, man, you could easily fill up your ship with gold, which is what the Bible says they did, and then head on home. It was a 3-year journey. So this is kind of what they were looking for. This is what the Egyptians were looking for in the Southwest. They were exploring. The Chinese, too, were doing similar things. And, in fact, there's been a number of pretty interesting books written in just the last few years about the Chinese circumnavigating the globe before Columbus, a lot of early voyages and things like that. And it's back to what I said earlier, how oceans are highways, not barriers. I mean, it's really unscientific for mainstream archaeologists to insist that ancient people couldn't get into boats and cross oceans. A couple of years ago, a French guy swam across the Atlantic Ocean. How about that? I mean, people have crossed the Atlantic in kayaks, small rowboats. Young teenagers have circumnavigated the entire world by themselves in small yachts without GPS or any of that stuff. So, I mean, and that's part of the enigma, too, was that the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Chinese, the Phoenicians, Romans, they had huge ships, gigantic ships that held 300 or 400 people. In Tonga, they had giant ships like that, too, that were going. I mean, they were much bigger than any ships that Columbus had. You now get into things like the Piri Reis map and the maps of the ancient sea kings by Charles Hapgood.
Oh, yeah, that map is incredible.
Well, right, and it seems that even like Columbus and other people, they had some of these old maps, and they were kept secret too. This was one of the things about a lot of the ancient sea routes and things like that. They were kept secret. The Phoenicians kept secrets. The Phoenician sailors were not allowed to talk about where they went and the ports that they went to. That the Toltecs, whose capital was Tula in northern Mexico, they're related to a lot of the stuff here in Arizona. They conquered Chichen Itza in the Yucatan at one point. The Toltecs are depicted as guys with thick beards and mustaches. They wear helmets. They carry swords and shields. They look like Phoenicians. They look like Mediterranean warriors and stuff.
Persians, everything like that.
Stuff like that, right. And in fact, it seems that probably the Toltecs were some offshoot of the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, who had already a transatlantic trade. Another similar thing there is the Phoenicians were known as the purple people, and they wore purple robes. And even the whole concept today of kings and queens wearing purple gowns and purple crowns and things like that, that comes from the Phoenicians, who all wore purple. And that purple color was a very special dye that they got from a shellfish. That was a secret technique of taking this dye. Phoenicians were famous for it. The Carthaginians were also Phoenicians. But also the Mayans used also this purple dye, this same unusual shellfish dye, which the Phoenicians had a secret. Another curious thing along this line with the Egyptians and stuff is boomerangs. We think of boomerangs as being some kind of Australian Aboriginal
device.
thing.
Yeah.
But boomerangs have been found all over the world. And in fact, the Egyptians hunted with boomerangs. King Tut, in his tomb in Egypt, there was a trunk full of boomerangs that was found in in his tomb. It's part of the Tutankhamun treasure. And in fact, if you go to the Cairo Museum and you go to the Tutankhamun area, you will see on display all of his boomerangs. And he was a boomerang nut. I mean, he didn't just have a couple of boomerangs. He had a whole trunk full of dozens of them. It's well known that the Egyptians hunted with boomerangs. But if you go also down to museums like the Mexico City Museum for the Aztecs and Zapotecs and Toltecs, you'll also see boomerangs on display there. And the Hopi Indians who live here in northern Arizona near the Grand Canyon, they supposedly were the keepers of this secret Egyptian city in the Grand Canyon. And the Hopis also hunt with boomerangs. And they were famous for that. Prior to the Spanish conquest, that's what young Hopi warriors did. They went out with boomerangs and hunted birds and rabbits and things like that. California has been drying up for several thousand years. These lakes have been drying up. There used to be, in the 1800s, there was a big lake around Fresno called Tulare Lake. That lake is not there today. But there used to be big sailing ships and stuff like that on that lake in the mid-1800s. Are mainly around Southern California. Some of them as
right in the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah, ships out in the desert. That's right. And there's a number of stories along those lines. They know that some of these occurred. A similar thing like this there was another lake also around Baker, California, and along the Death Valley is very much like this. But back in the late 1800s, this lake still existed, and it was a long lake. And they still ran a paddle steamer on it. And one winter, this paddle steamer was taking a load of gold from some mines in Nevada. It sank in a storm on the lake and was gone. That lake then dried up over the next 40 years. And then in the 1930s, one of the early California aviators went out flying over the Southern California desert. And lo and behold, he sees like a riverboat steamer with a paddle wheel out in the desert, covered with, partially covered with sand. And that's how they discovered that ship, and it had a lost gold. This was 1928 or something.
That is, all right, so let's assume they were able to boat their way up. Why keep it a secret?
John, this is Scott Walter.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Well, not that great. I just came from the site, and the government won't let me in. It's bullshit.
Dying to see this video here.
I'm glad to show it to you.
Yeah, I'd say, I got to tell you, the government wouldn't let me in. How the hell did you get in and take these videos?
Well, I had a permit back in 2011. I tell you, if you want to know more about this, and this is how I found out about the site, you need to contact Richard Thornton. He's a Native American architect down in Georgia, and he's spent, a decade studying this.
Does he think there could be a Maya-Georgia connection at this site?
Yeah, and that's what caught my attention.
Walter.
Richard Thornton, glad to meet you.
Yeah, I was visiting down at Chattahoochee National Forest.
Yes.
Tried to look at some mound structures. I'm investigating a possible connection between the Mayans and Georgia. And tried to go look at these mounds, and I was denied.
You're kidding.
No, I was denied. First of all, I take it you support this whole Mayan-Georgia connection?
Well, it's not even a theory, it's a fact. The Mayas are one of the Mexican Native American ethnic groups that became the Creek Indians.
What are some of the things that to you provide evidence of this assimilation, really, or this coming together here in Georgia from Mexico.
We have the architecture, we have the cultural traditions, the art are very similar.
Okay.
Approximately a third to a half of the words in the Itzati Creek language are either Maya or Totonac.
Okay, linguistics.
Linguistics.
If you're able to make a definitive connection, it will prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that we definitely have this connection between the Mayans in Mexico and Georgia.
It actually matches almost perfectly.
So we have a match, don't we?
Yes, we do.
You know what? I'm surprised, but yet I'm not surprised. Given everything that I've seen, this was the final piece to tie this together. At the start of a new Batu, a new beginning. A new beginning might have been what the Mayans were looking for in Georgia.
Quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. Quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. Quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
In the crime that was committed against us, the slave trader, the slave master, but the third one that they don't tell you anything about. The slave master. You've read about the slave trader, and you've read about the slave master. In fact, you know the slave master. He's still in his hand. But you never read the history. In history, part played by the slave maker. You can't make a wise man a slave. You can't make a warrior a slave. When you and I came here, or rather when we were brought here from a society that was highly civilized. Our culture was at the highest level, and we were warriors. We knew no fear. How could they make us slaves? They had to do the same thing to us that was done that you do to a horse. When you take a horse out of the wild, you don't just jump on him and drive him, or put a bit in his mouth and use him to plow with. No, you got to break him in first. Once you break him in, then you can ride him. Now the man who rides him is not the man who breaks him in. It takes a different type of man to break him in than it takes to ride him. The average man that can ride him can't break him in. It takes a cruel man to break him in. A mean man. A heartless man. A man with no feeling. And this is why they took the role of the slave maker out of history. It was so criminal that they don't even dare to write about it, to tell what was done to you and me to break us in and break us down to the level that we're on today. Because when you find the role that that slave maker play, I'm telling you, you find it hard to forget and forgive. You find it hard. I can't forgive the slave trader nor the slave master. You know I can't forgive the slave maker. The people weren't brought, our people weren't brought right here to this country. They were first dropped off in the West Indian Islands, in the Caribbean. Most of the slaves that were brought from Africa were dropped off first in the Caribbean, West Indian Islands. Why? This was the breaking in grounds. They would break them in down there, and as they broke them in, then they would bring the ones whose spirit had been broken onto America. They had all kinds of methods of breaking them in. They bred fear into them, for one thing. I read in one book how the slave maker used to take a pregnant woman, black woman, and make her watch as her man would be tortured or put to death. One of those slave makers had trees that he planted in positions where he would bend them and tie them, and then tie the hand of a black man to one and the hand to the other and his legs to two more. And he cut the rope. And when he cut the rope, that tree would snap up and pull the arm of the black man right out of his side. Pull him up into 4 different parts. I'll show you books where you can read it. They write about it. And they made the pregnant black women stand there and watch as they did it, so that all this grief and fear that they felt would go right into that baby, that black baby that was yet to be born. It would be born afraid, born with fear. And you got it in you right now. Right now, you still got, when you get in front of that blue-eyed thing, you start to itching, don't you? And you don't know why. It was bred into you. But when you find out how they did it, you can get it out of it and put it right back in there. They used to take a black woman who would be pregnant and tie her up by her toes, let her be hanging head down. And while the baby, they would take a knife and cut her stomach open, let that black unborn child fall out, and then stomp its head in the ground. I'll show you books where they write about this. I name them to you. Slave Trade by Spear. From Slavery to Freedom by Hope Franklin. Negro Family in the USA. Fraser touches on some of it all night long. Anti-Slavery by Dwight Lowell DeMond. I cite the books all night long where they rate themselves on what they did to you and me and got nerve to say, we teach hate because we're talking about what they did. While they're lucky. Really, they're lucky. They're fortunate. Slaves used to sing that song about, my Lord's gonna move this wicked race and raise up a righteous nation that would obey. They knew what they were talking about. They were talking about the man. They used to sing the song, Good News, the Chariot is coming. If you notice, everything they sang, those spirituals were talking about going to get away from it. None of them wanted to stay there. Only one, you the one sitting around here now like a now on the law, want to stay there. You're supposed to be educated in this. You're supposed to know what's happening, you know. They're not supposed to know what's happening, but everything they sang, every song, had a hint in it that they weren't satisfied here, that they weren't being treated right, that somebody had to go. The slave maker knew that he couldn't make these people slaves until he first made them dumb. And one of the best ways to make a man dumb is take his tongue, take his language. Even a man who can't talk, what do they call him? A dummy. Once your language is gone, you are a dummy. You can't communicate with people who are your relatives. You can never have access to information from your family. You just can't communicate. So, and also if you notice, the natural tongue that one speaks is referred to as one's mother tongue. Mother tongue. And the natural intelligence that a person has before he goes to school is called mother wit. Not father wit. It's called mother wit because everything a child knows before it gets to school, it learns from its mother, not its father. And if it never goes to school, whatever native intelligence it has, it got it primarily from its mother, not its father. So it's called mother wit. And the mother is also the one who teaches the child how to speak its language. So that natural tongue is called mother tongue. Whenever you find as many people as we who aren't able to speak any mother tongue, well, that's evidence right there. Something was done to our mother. Something had to have happened to her. And they had laws in those days that made it mandatory for a child to be taken, for a black child, to be taken from his mother as fast as that child was born. The mother never had a chance to rear it. The child would be brought up somewhere else, away from the mother, so that the mother couldn't teach the child what she knew about itself, about her past, about its heritage. It would have to grow up in complete darkness, knowing nothing about the land where it came from or the people that it came from, not even about its own mother. There was no relationship between the black child and its mother. It was against the law. And if the master would ever find any of those children who had any knowledge of its mother tongue, that child was put to death. They had to stamp out the language. They did it scientifically. They found any one of them that could speak it off on its head, or they would put it to death. They would kill it in front of the mother, if necessary. This is history. This is how they took your language. You didn't lose it. It didn't evaporate. They took it with a scientific process because they knew they had to take it to make you dumb, or into the dummy that you and I now are. I read in some books where it said that some of the slave mothers would try and be tricky in order to teach their child, who'd be off in another field somewhere. They themselves would be praying, and they'd pray in a loud voice and in their own language. And the child in the distant field would hear his mother's voice, and he'd learn how to pray the same way. And in learning how to pray,
take upon some of the land. And the master found that this was being done, and immediately he stepped up his efforts to kill all the little children that were benefiting from this. And so it became against the law, even for the slave to be caught praying in his tongue if he knew it. It was against the law. You've heard some of the people say they had to pray with their head in the bucket. Well, they weren't praying to the Jesus that they're praying to now. Then the white man let you call on that Jesus all day long. In fact, he'll make it possible for you to call on him. But you will call on somebody else then, that he had more fear of. And then you're calling on that somebody else in that other language that caused him a bit of fear, a bit of fright. They used to have to steal away and pray. All those songs that the slaves taught or sang and called spiritual had wrapped up in it some of what was happening to them. And when the child realized it couldn't hear its mother pray anymore, the slaves would then come up with a song, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Or the song, Motherless Child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Father gone, mother gone, motherless child sees a hard time. All of these songs were describing what was happening to us then in the only way the slaves knew how to communicate, in song. They didn't dare say it outright, so they put it in song. They pretended that they were singing about Moses in the land, go down Moses. They weren't talking about Moses and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. They were trying to talk to each other over the slave master's head. Now you got a hold of the thing and you believing in it for real. You really, I hear you singing go down Moses, and you still talking about Moses 4,000 years ago. You out of your mind. But those slaves had a whole lot of sense. And everything they sang was designed toward freedom, designed toward going back home, or designed toward getting this big white ink off their back. For 300 years, we stayed in that level. We stayed at that level. Finally, we got to where we had no language, no history, no name. We couldn't speak our own language. We had none. And he then began to teach us that we came from a jungle, where the people had no language. This is the crime that he committed. He convinced us that our people back home were savages, animals in a jungle. And the reason we couldn't talk was because we never had a language. And we grew up thinking that we never had one. And in the meantime, while he was working on us, his brothers in England, and in France, and in Belgium, and in Spain, and in Italy, and in Germany, was working on the African continent. While he was working on us over here, they were running wild on the African continent, stomping out all signs that ever there was a civilization over it, making slaves out of them over there too. And by working together as partners, the man on the European continent, in cahoots with this white man on the American continent, succeeded in taking over Africa and Asia and the entire world while we went to sleep. And then in 1865, he came up with a trick pretending that he was fighting the Civil War to set us free. But he wasn't to set us free. He came up with another trick that he was issuing an Emancipation Proclamation to set us free, which it wasn't to set us free. And then he came up also pretending that he was putting some amendments to the Constitution to set us free, which it wasn't to set us free. And then later on he came up with a Supreme Court decision which he said was to give us free access to better education, which it wasn't to do that. And then last year he came up with a bill that he called also to give us more freedom, which it also wasn't to do that. Any man who will know the level of civilization that we started out on and came from, any man who knows the criminal deeds that was done to us by his people to bring us to the level that we've been on for the past 300 years is so deceptive, so deceitful, so criminally deceitful, that it is almost beyond his nature or desire to come up with anything meaningful that will undo what has been done to us over the past 300 years. It is absolutely necessary. Anything that is done for us has to be done by us. They used to take a black woman who would be pregnant and tie her up by her toes, let her be hanging head down. And while the baby, they would take a knife and cut her stomach open, let that black unborn child fall out, and then stomp its head in the ground. I show you books where they write about this. I name them to you. Slave Trade by Spear. From Slavery to Freedom by Pope Franklin. Negro Family in the USA Frazier touches on some of it all night long. Anti-slavery by Dwight Lowell DeMond. I cite the books all night long where they rate themselves on what they did to you and me and got nerves to say, we teach hate because we're talking about what they did. Why, they're lucky. Really, they're lucky. They're fortunate. Slaves used to sing that song about, my Lord gonna move this wicked verse and raise up a righteous nation that would obey. They knew what they were talking about. They were talking about the man. They used to sing the song, Good News of Charity is coming. If you notice, everything they sang in those spirituals was talking about going to get away from it. None of them wanted to stay there. Only one of you, the one sitting around here now like I'm not on the law, want to stay there. You're supposed to be educated in this. You're supposed to know what's happening, you know. They're not supposed to know what's happening, but everything they sang, every song, had a hint in it that they weren't satisfied here, that they weren't being treated right, that somebody had to go. The slave maker knew that he couldn't make these people slaves until he first made them dumb. And one of the best ways to make a man dumb is take his tongue, take his language. Even a man who can't talk, what do they call him? A dummy. Once your language is gone, you are a dummy. You can't communicate with people who are your relatives. You can never have access to information from your family. You just can't communicate. So, and also if you notice, the natural tongue that one speaks is referred to as one's mother tongue. Mother tongue. And the natural intelligence that a person has before he goes to school is called mother wit. Not father wit. It's called mother wit because everything a child knows before it gets to school, it learns from its mother, not its father. And if it never goes to school, whatever native intelligence it has, it got it primarily from its mother, not its father. So it's called mother wit. And the mother is also the one who teaches the child how to speak its language. So that natural tongue is called mother tongue. Whenever you find as many people as we who aren't able to speak any mother tongue, well, that's evidence right there. Something was done to our mother. Something had to have happened to her. And they had laws in those days that made it mandatory for a child to be taken, for a black child, to be taken from his mother as fast as that child was born. The mother never had a chance to rear. The child would be brought up somewhere else, away from the mother, so that the mother couldn't teach the child what she knew about itself, about her past, about its heritage. It would have to grow up in complete darkness, knowing nothing about the land where it came from or the people that it came from, not even about its own mother. There was no relationship between the black child and its mother. It was against the law. And if the master would ever find any of those children who had any knowledge of its mother tongue, that child was put to death. They had to stamp out the language. They did it scientifically. They found any one of them that could speak it off on its head, or they would put it to death. They would kill it in front of the other, if necessary. This is history. This is how they took your language. You didn't lose it. It didn't evaporate. They took it with a scientific process because they knew they had to take it to make you dumb, or into the dummy that you and I now are. I read in some books where it said that some of the slave mothers would try and be tricky in order to teach their child, who'd be off in another field somewhere. They themselves would be praying, and they'd pray in a loud voice and in their own language. And the child in the distant field would hear his mother's voice, and he'd learn how to pray the same way. And in learning how to pray, he'd pick up on some of the language. And the master found that this was being done, and immediately he stepped up his efforts to kill all the little children that were benefiting from this. And so it became against the law, even for the slave to be caught praying in his tongue if he knew it. It was against the law. You've heard some of the people say they had to pray with their head in the bucket. Well, they weren't praying to the Jesus that they're praying to now. Then the white man let you call on that Jesus all day long. That he'll make it possible for you to call on him. But you were calling on somebody else then, that he had more fear of. And in your calling on that somebody else in that other language, that caused him a bit of fear, a bit of fright. They used to have to steal away and pray. All those songs that the slaves taught or sang and called spiritual had wrapped up in it some of what was happening to them. And when the child realized it couldn't hear its mother pray anymore, the slaves would then come up with a song, I couldn't hear nobody pray, or the song Motherless Child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Father gone, mother gone, motherless child sees a hard time. All of these songs were describing what was happening to us then in the only way the slaves knew how to communicate, in song. They didn't dare say it outright, so they put it in song. They pretended that they were singing about Moses in the land, go down Moses. They weren't talking about Moses and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. They were trying to some kind of talk to each other over the slave master's head. Now you got a hold of the thing and you believing in it for real. You really, I hear you singing go down Moses, and you still talking about Moses 4,000 years ago. You out of your mind. But those slaves had a whole lot of sense. And everything they sang was designed toward freedom, designed toward going back home, or designed toward getting this big white ink off their back. For 300 years, we stayed in that level. We stayed at that level. Finally, we got to where we had no language, no history, no name. The white man named us after himself. Jones, Smith, Johnson, Bunch, and names like those. We couldn't speak our own language. We had none. And he then began to teach us as we came from a jungle, where the people had no language. This is the crime that he committed. He convinced us that our people back home were savages, animals in the jungle. And the reason we couldn't talk was because we never had a language. And we grew up thinking that we never had one. And in the meantime, while he was working on us, his brothers in England, and in France, and in Belgium, and in Spain, and in Italy, and in Germany, was working on the African continent. While he was working on us over here, they were running wild on the African continent, stomping out all signs that ever there was a civilization over it, making slaves out of them over there too. And by working together as partners, the man on the European continent, he in cahoots with this white man on the American continent, succeeded in taking over Africa and Asia and the entire world, while we went to sleep. And then in 1865, he came up with a trick pretending that he was fighting a civil war to set us free, but he wasn't to set us free. He came up with another trick that he was issuing an Emancipation Proclamation to set us free, which it wasn't to set us free. And then he came up also pretending that he was putting some amendments to the Constitution to set us free, which it wasn't to set us free. And then later on he came up with a Supreme Court decision which he said was to give us free access to better education, which it wasn't to do that. And then last year he came up with a bill that he called also to give us more freedom, which it also wasn't to do that. Any man who will know the level of civilization that we started out on and came from, any man who knows the criminal deeds that was done to us by his people to bring us to the level that we've been on for the past 300 years is so deceptive, so deceitful, so criminally deceitful, that it is almost beyond his nature or desire to come up with anything meaningful that will undo what has been done to us over the past 300 years. It is absolutely necessary. Anything that is done for us has to be done by us. Now, brothers and sisters, it's after 10 o'clock, and I definitely didn't intend to go beyond 10. But I do want you to have at least a 10-minute question period before we dismiss and prepare for our next week meeting next week. It's necessary tonight to go back somewhat and remind ourselves, because many of you know everything that I've said tonight. You know it already. Then there are many others who don't. But I felt it absolutely necessary to use tonight since we're getting ready to go into February and Negro History Week, to use tonight to kind of brush up on some of the history of our people preceding that existed prior to the time we were brought to America. And then next week, next Sunday night, deal with current conditions and the tricky schemes that is used by the government as well as other forces to perpetuate our condition rather than alleviate it. And then on the third Sunday, the 31st of January, it's our intention to present to you the program and the solution of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which we feel will bring about some meaningful results immediately, and which we will ask your 100% cooperation in order to make it materialize. Before we have our question period, we're going to take up a collection. And I want to ask you, especially tonight, please be more generous than you have been. Because if there's anything we need, it's finance. We don't get any help from any outside source. Anybody else would get it. We don't get any help whatsoever other than what we get right here at these meetings from you. So I would ask you to, and also this week, we want to take out an ad in one of the local newspapers so that it will be known we're out here this week. None of the newspapers ever talk about our meeting. They don't help us publicize it in any way, shape, or form, other than the militant does. But some of the Negro newspapers don't. I don't know whether they won't, but I do know that they don't. And I would like for you to try and dig down as deep as you can and help us, because we need it. The fact that we could get stronger financial support, we would be in a position to make our program materialize much faster than we have. The entire East, the dark world, is on the rise, whether you like it or not. If the dark world rises up, it puts the white world on the spot. It puts the western world on the spot. And it puts you and me on the spot. Why does it put us on the spot? Because although we're in the West, we're from the East. Many black Americans don't realize this. You are not of the West. You are in the West. You're not a Westerner. You're from the East. You're not white. You're in the white world. That doesn't make you white. You're as black as you ever were. But you're just in the white world. Drowned us with propaganda about Negro history in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama. Never do they take us back across the water back home. They take us down home. But they never give us a history of back home. They never give us enough information to let us know what were we doing before we ended up in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and some of those other prison states. They give us the impression with Negro History Week that we were cotton pickers all of our lives. Cotton pickers, orange growers, mammies and uncles for the white man in this country. This is our history when you talk in terms of Negro History Week. They might tell you about one or two people who took a peanut and made another white man rich. George Washington Carver, he was a scientist, but he died broke. He made Ford rich. So he wasn't doing anything for himself and his people. He got a good name for us, but what did we get out of it? Nothing. The master got it. It's like a dog who runs out in the woods and grabs a rabbit. No matter how hungry the dog is, does he eat it? No. He takes it back and lays it at the boss's feet. And the boss skins it, takes the meat, and gives the dog the bone. Every contribution we make, we don't make it for our people. We make it for the man. We make it for our master. He gets the benefit from it. We die not for our people. We die for him. We don't die for our home and our house. We die for his house. We don't die for our country. We die for his country. A lot of you all were fools on the front line. Were you not? Yes, you were. You put on the uniform and went right up on the front line like a roaring hound dog, barking for master. And when you come back here, you'll have to box since you got back. So Negro History Week reminds us of this. It doesn't remind us of past achievements, but it reminds us only of the achievements we made in the Western Hemisphere under the tutelage of the white man. So that whatever achievement that was made in the Western Hemisphere that the spotlight is put upon, this is the white man's shrewd way of taking credit for whatever we accomplished. But he never let us know of an accomplishment that we made prior to being brought here. This is another trick. The worst trick of all is when he names us Negro and calls us Negro. And then when we call ourselves that, we end up tricking ourselves, saying that we're not Negroes. And have never been. Until we were brought here and made into that, we were scientifically produced by the white man. And whenever you see somebody who calls himself a Negro, he's a product of Western civilization. Not only Western civilization, but Western crime. The Negro, as he is called, or calls himself, in the West, is best evidence that could be used against Western civilization today. One of the main reasons we're called Negro is so we won't know who we really are. And when you call yourself that, you don't know who you really are. You don't know what you are, you don't know where you came from. You don't know what is yours. And as long as you call yourself a Negro, nothing is yours. No language, you can't lay claim to any language, not even English. You mess it up. You can't lay claim to any name, any type of name that will identify you as something that you should be. You can't lay claim to any culture as long as you use the word Negro to identify yourself. It attaches you to nothing. It doesn't even identify your color. If you talk about one of them, they call themselves white. White is legitimate. It means that's what color they are. Puerto Rican tells you that there's something else named somewhere else that they're here now. Negro doesn't tell you anything. I mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. What do you identify it with? Tell me. Nothing. What do you attach it to? What do you attach to it? Nothing. It's completely in the middle of nowhere. And when you call yourself that, that's where you are, right in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't give you a language, because there's no such thing as a Negro language. It doesn't give you a country, because there's no such thing as a Negro country. It doesn't give you a culture. There's no such thing as Negro culture. It doesn't exist. The land doesn't exist. The culture doesn't exist. The language doesn't exist. And the man doesn't exist. They take you out of existence by calling you a Negro. And you can walk around in front of them all day long from then on, and they act like they don't even see you. Because you made yourself non-existent. It's a person who has no history. And by having no history, he has no culture. Just as a tree without roots is dead, a people without history or cultural roots also become a dead people. And when you look at us, those of us who are called Negro, we're called that because we're like a dead people. We have nothing to identify ourselves as part of the human family. You know, you take a tree, you can tell what kind of tree it is by looking at the leaves. If the leaves are gone, you can look at the bark and tell what kind it is. But when you find a tree with the leaves gone and the bark gone, everything gone, you call that a what? A stump. And you can't identify a stump as easily as you can identify a tree. And this is the position that you and I are in here in America. Formerly, we could be identified by the names we wore when we came here. When we were first brought here, we had different names. When we were first brought here, we had a different language. And these names and this language identified the culture that we were brought from, the land that we were brought from. And in identifying that, we were able to point toward what we had produced, our net worth. But once our names were taken, and our language was taken, and our identity was destroyed, and our roots were cut off with no history, we became like a stump, something dead, a twig, over here in the Western Hemisphere. And anybody could step on us, trample upon us, or burn us, and there'd be nothing that we could do about it. Those of you who are religious, who go to church, there are stories in the Bible that can be used easily to pretty well tell the condition of the black man in America once he became a Negro, where they refer to him as the lost sheep. meaning someone who's lost from his own kind. Which is how you and I have been for the past 400 years. We've been in a land where we are not citizens, or in a land where they treated us as strangers. Or they have another symbolic story in there called the dry bones. And many of you have gone to church Sunday after Sunday and got, the ghosts, they call it. What happened? And started talking about when the old preacher started singing about dry bones, you knock over benches. Just because he was singing about them bones, those dry bones. I don't know how to say that. But you never could identify the symbolic meaning of those bones. How they were dead because they had been cut off from their own time. And our people here in America have been in the same condition as those dry bones that you sit in church singing about. But you shed more tears over those dry bones than you shed over yourself. This shows what happens to a people when they are cut off and stripped of everything, like you and I have been cut off and stripped of everything. We become a people like no other people. And we are a people like no other people. No other people on earth like you and me. We're unique. We're different. They say that we're Negroes, and they say that Negro means black, but yet they don't call all black people Negroes. You see the contradiction? Mind you, they say that we're Negro because Negro means black in Spanish, yet they don't call all black people Negroes. Something there doesn't add up. And then to get around it, they say mankind is divided up into three categories: Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negro. Now pick up on that. And all black people aren't Negro. They got some jet black ones that they classify as Caucasoid. But if you study very closely, all of the black ones that they classify as Caucasoid are those that still have great civilization, or still have the remains of what was once a great civilization. And the only ones that they classify as Negroid are those that they find with no evidence that they were ever civilized. Then they call them Negroid. But they can't afford to let any black-skinned people who have evidence that they formerly occupied a high seat in civilization, they can't afford to let them be called Negroid, so they take them on into the Caucasoid classification. And actually, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid, there's no such thing. These are so-called anthropological terms that were put together by anthropologists who were nothing but agents of the colonial powers, and they were purposely given that status. They were purposely given such scientific positions in order that they could come up with definitions that would justify the European domination over the African and the Asian. So immediately they invented classifications that would automatically demote these people or put them on a lesser level. All of the Caucasoids are the high level. The Negroids are kept at a low level. This is just plain trickery that their scientists engage in order to keep you and me thinking that we never were nothing, and therefore he's doing us a favor as he lets us step upward or forward in his particular society or civilization. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Now then, once you see that the condition that we're in is directly related to our lack of knowledge concerning the history of the black man, only then do you realize the importance of knowing something about the history of the black man. And the black man's history, when you refer to him as a black man, you go way back. But when you refer to him as a Negro, you can only go as far back as the Negro goes. And when you go beyond the shores of America, you can't find the Negro. So if you go beyond the shores of America in history, looking for the history of the black man, if you're looking for him under the term Negro, you won't find him. He doesn't exist. So you end up thinking that you didn't play any role in history. But if you want to take the time to do research for yourself, I think you'll find that on the African continent, there was always, prior to the discovery of America, there was always a higher level of history, a higher level of culture and civilization than that which existed in Europe at the same time. At least 5,000 years ago, they had a black civilization in the Middle East. Wasn't even in Africa. In the Middle East, called the Sumerians. Now when they show you pictures of the Sumerians, they're trying to make you think that they were white people. But if you go and read some of the ancient manuscripts, or even read between the lines on some of the current writers, you'll find that the Sumerian civilization was a very dark-skinned civilization, and it existed prior even to the existence of the Babylonian Empire. Right in the same area where you find Iraq and the Tigris, Euphrates rivers there. There was a black-skinned people who lived there, who had a high state of culture way back then. And at a time even beyond theirs, there was a black-skinned people in India who were black, just as black as you and I, called Dravidians. They inhabited the subcontinent of India even before the present people that you see living there today. And they had a high state of culture. And the present people of India even looked upon them as gods. Most of their statues, if you notice, have pronounced African features. You go right to India today, in their religion, which is called Buddhism, and they give all their Buddhas the image of a black man, with his lips and his nose and his, even show his hair all curled up on his head. His hair they didn't curl it up. It was born. He was born that way. And these people lived in that area before the present people of India lived there. The black man lived in the Middle East before the present people who are now living there lived there. And he had a high culture and a high civilization, to say nothing about the oldest civilization of all that he had in Egypt along the banks of the Nile. And in Carthage in northwest Africa, another part of the continent, and at a later date in Mali and Ghana and Tonga and the Moorish civilization. All of these civilizations existed on the African continent before America was discovered. Now, the black civilization that shook the white man up the most was the Egyptian civilization. And it was a black civilization. It was along the banks of the Nile, which runs through the heart of Africa. But again, this is tricky white man, and he's tricky. And mind you again when I say this, it's not a racist thing. Some of them might be tricky, but all of them white men are tricky. And his civilization shows his trickiness. This tricky white man that was able to take the Egyptian civilization, write books about it, put pictures in those books, make movies for television and the theater, so skillfully done until he had even convinced other white people that the ancient Egyptians were white people themselves. They were Africans. They were as much African as you and I. And he even gave the clue away when he made this movie King Solomon's Mines. And he showed the Watusis, with their black cells. And he outright admitted in there that they looked like the ancient pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Which means that the white man himself, he knows that the black man had this high civilization in Egypt. which today the remains show the black man in that area had mastered mathematics, had mastered architecture, and could the building, the art of building, science of building things, had even mastered astronomy. The pyramid, as the white scientists admit, is constructed in such a position on this earth to show that the black people who were the architects of it had a knowledge of geography that was so vast, they knew the exact center of the earth's landmass, because the base of the pyramid is located in the exact center of the earth's landmass, which it could not have been so situated by its architect unless the architect in that day had known that the earth was round and knew how much land there was in all directions from where he was heading. And the pyramid was built so many thousand years ago that they don't even know the exact time that it was built. But they do know that the people who brought it into existence had mastered the science of building, had mastered the various sciences of the earth, and had mastered astronomy. I read one where one scientist said that the architect of the pyramid had built a shaft that went outward from the center of the pyramid, where in the place where it marked in the sky was the location where a star, a blue star, I think it's some color star, made an appearance only once every 50,000 years. Now they said that this architect's knowledge of astronomy was so vast that he evidently had access to histories or records that spotlighted the existence of a star that made its appearance at a certain spot in the sky only once every 50,000 years. Now, he could not have known this unless he had records going back beyond 50,000 years. Yet the pyramid is a living witness today that the black people who were responsible for bringing it into existence had this kind of knowledge. And when you read the opinions of the white scientists about the pyramid and the builders of the pyramid, they don't make any secret at all over the fact that they marvel over the scientific ability that was in the possession of those people way back then. They had mastered chemistry to such extent they could make paints that the dye has not, the color doesn't fade.
Newspaper story in the 1909 Phoenix Gazette. Phoenix was a young city then, and what they reported was really astonishing. I mean, they reported that the Smithsonian Institution was doing excavations in the Grand Canyon. They said that it was being supervised by an archaeologist named Jordan. It all had to do with another explorer named Kincaid, who had been traveling down the Grand Canyon. And what he claimed he discovered was these caverns inside the Grand Canyon. Inside these caverns were, he thought, and then the Egyptian, the Smithsonian, then later confirmed, according to the newspaper report, that there were Egyptian artifacts, there were Hindu, Buddhist artifacts from India. They were saying that, there were mummies in there. They were saying this was going to totally change the history of America and the Southwest. Egyptians and Hindus and Buddhists were coming across the Pacific and the Atlantic, coming to North America. They were involved in the civilizations here, and that apparently they had a special vault in the Grand Canyon where they buried some of the leaders, the people they had left behind with artifacts and things like that, and that the Smithsonian Institution got involved. They were hauling all this stuff out of these caves, including these mummies, swords, shields, statues.
Jeez.
Right, and then this, the Jordan, the archaeologist, he was going back to Washington, D.C., back to the Smithsonian, and, this is these exciting new discoveries in the Grand Canyon. There was one follow-up story, and then no one really ever heard of it again. And it's really a lot like the first Indiana Jones movie, where Indiana Jones has discovered the lost Ark of the Covenant, and then right at the end of the movie, he says, well, where's the Ark? And they tell him, oh, well, don't worry, top men are working on it. And then the last scene in the movie is this giant warehouse, apparently at the Smithsonian, and the Ark of the Covenant is in this crate, and it's being put in this giant warehouse, and no one's ever going to see it again.
Just put away, yeah.
And that's kind of what appears to have happened with these artifacts in the Grand Canyon. So,
well, first of all, do you think the article was real? It wasn't a joke, wasn't a hoax, right?
Well, back in those days, there were a lot of hoax newspaper articles. And, as a researcher, I'm constantly looking for and digging up old newspaper articles and stories about giants, unusual archaeological finds, weird things like that. And when you look at this one, especially because of the detail, it's naming people, later I was able to verify some of it, and I would say yes. I mean, this does seem to be a true story, and the more and more I've looked into it over the years, I first wrote about it in my book, Lost Cities of North and Central America, that came out in 1994. And in those years, I've had a number of letters. People have called me occasionally, trying to give me, different leads and things like that. And in the end, what I've concluded is that, yes, there really is something to this. Well, it's quite a strange thing. And then as I started looking into the Smithsonian and the idea of cover-ups, people naturally ask me, when this subject comes up, they're like, well, why would they cover something like that up anyway? And that is a good question, and there are answers for that. Part of the whole thing of the Southwest and what was going on here, even right now, I'm in Arizona talking to you. There's a lot of the history here is just so discombobulated. The idea of mummies that were found in the Grand Canyon. Mainstream archaeologists maintain even today that Native Americans here in New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Utah, whatnot, that they didn't mummify the dead. And yet the Grand Canyon article is talking about mummies and things like that in these caverns. So that itself was a clue.
There were also apparently tablets of stone with hieroglyphs written all over it that the Smithsonian folks took.
That's right, and we don't know what hieroglyphs that would have been. Egyptian, presumably. They don't describe them. There's no photos. We don't. That's one of the things that I've really searched for.